Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. A cold drizzle fell upon Redwood Falls as 21-year-old Calla Monroe stepped onto the worn asphalt just outside the only bus station in town. The overcast sky seemed to hang heavy, trapping the moisture and chill in the air. She stood still for a moment, gripping the handle of her single suitcase, letting the reality sink in that she was truly back. 3 years had passed since she left, determined to begin her life anew in a place where her identity wasn't defined by mystical bonds or her lineage. Yet the tug of family and crisis had pulled her back, leaving her with no choice but to return and face everything she had so carefully run from. Calla's memories of Redwood Falls were painted with sun-drenched childhood days, teenage arguments, and the night she turned her back on a destiny that so many believed was irrevocable. She had been only 18 when she discovered the identity of her fated mate, Alpha Ryker Thorn, a man of imposing presence and endless ambition. The entire pack expected her to become his Luna, to unite Redwood Falls with the Bloodfang Pack, forging a bond that transcended normal werewolf customs. But she refused. She wanted her own future, free of the constraints of alpha politics. Most of all, she wanted to break the chain that bound her to a man she had barely grown to know. It was no small matter, rejecting a mate. That day, she left behind scandal, heartbreak, and a bond that was supposed to be sacred. She believed, with youthful certainty, that she could outrun both fate and the painful longing that haunted her dreams. Now, 3 years later, the streets felt worn under her feet, the once bright storefronts looking tired and neglected in the fading daylight. Questions swarmed her mind. Would old friends remember her with scorn or pity? Had Redwood Falls changed as much as she had in their time apart? Most crucially, where were her parents? That single question had shattered her carefully constructed new life, forcing her to board a bus back to the place she had never intended to see again. Earlier that week, she received the news. Her parents, both integral members of Redwood Falls, had disappeared. No letters, no phone calls, no signs of them anywhere. It was as if they vanished overnight. The local authorities had little to go on, and rumors hinted that werewolf matters were at play, maybe rogues, maybe something far more dangerous. Calla had no choice but to return. Fear weighed on her chest, knowing her family's safety could be hanging by a thread. She looked down the empty street, recalling how, as a child, she would run to the bakery on the corner to buy fresh pastries on weekends. The bakery was shuttered now, windows dark. A few passers-by glanced her way, curiosity lighting their faces, though nobody stopped to speak. The faint drizzle grew heavier, prompting her to lift the hood of her jacket and start walking. She needed to see if her childhood home still stood as she remembered, or if it too lay silent, revealing the harsh truth of her parents' absence. Her father, Beta Monroe, was known for his steadfast loyalty to Redwood Falls and for his fair, firm approach to the pack's responsibilities. Her mother, a warm presence in every room, had been the center of the house's sunshine, always greeting her with a smile even in the toughest times. But Redwood Falls wasn't large. Any disruption was quickly noticed. That they could vanish without explanation only reinforced the urgency in Calla's steps. At last, she reached the gate at her childhood home. The wooden fence looked older, chipped from the elements. The once vibrant garden had weeds creeping at the edges, and the porch was devoid of the potted flowers her mother used to keep. Still clutching her suitcase, she tried the front door. It was locked. A jolt of dread rippled through her, but she produced the spare key from her jacket pocket. She still carried it, even after all this time, the metal slightly tarnished from disuse. The moment she stepped inside, the oppressive stillness engulfed her. No laughter, no murmured conversation, no gentle hum of the radio. The place smelled faintly of dust and stale air. She flicked the light switch by the entrance. The overhead bulb sputtered, then bathed the foyer in a weak glow. Her heart pounded as she searched each room, calling out in a hushed voice, "Mom? Dad?" She paused in the living room, eyes falling on framed photos that lined the mantel. Pictures of birthdays and family trips, capturing days when she felt so certain that she belonged to two worlds at once, human and werewolf, without fear of them clashing. Now, each smiling face felt like an echo, a reminder of how quickly life could shift. She dropped her suitcase in the corridor and turned toward the study, a place her father often used to keep records of pack activities and personal notes. If there was any clue to his disappearance, it might be hidden there. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing shelves stuffed with ledgers and old journals. She remembered how, as a teenager, she used to sneak in to read the histories of Redwood Falls, enthralled by the pack's stories. She never found the intricacies of werewolf politics appealing, though, which was partly why she ran. Rummaging through the disorganized desk drawers, she found random scraps of paper, but nothing that immediately suggested a crisis. Worry tugged at her every nerve. Eventually, a quiet knock on the front door startled her. She froze, ears straining to identify whether it was a friend or a stranger. She sniffed the air, a habit formed during childhood among werewolves, and picked up a faint, familiar scent. She hurried to the door, unlocking it to reveal Grayson, one of her father's oldest allies. Tall, graying around the temples, he wore a thick jacket that couldn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders. "Calla," he said, relief flickering in his eyes. "Thank goodness you made it back safely." She motioned for him to come inside. He stepped into the foyer, day sweeping across the empty house. "Any word on my parents?" she asked, unable to mask the anxious tremor in her voice. Grayson slowly shook his head. "No sign yet," he said, removing his cap. Raindrops clung to the brim. "But there have been reports of unusual activity on the eastern border. A few scouts claim they saw fleeting movements in the night, as if prowlers were testing Redwood Falls' defenses. Whether it's rogues or something else, I'm not certain, but your father must have been investigating if he went missing so suddenly." Fear gnawed at her insides. "Do we know if the Bloodfang Pack has any intel? They're the largest pack around. If there's a rogue threat or a bigger plot, maybe they picked up on it." Grayson hesitated. She could tell he was uncertain whether to raise the name of her rejected mate. The entire town had eventually learned that Calla spurned Ryker Thorn's claim. Bloodfang and Redwood Falls had never been outright hostile, but they were distant enough that neither liked to interfere in the other's territory without cause. "We have tried contacting the Bloodfang Pack," Grayson admitted, though not directly with Riker. "The channels are slow. If we push too hard, it might look like Redwood Falls is weak, or that we're seeking an alliance we can't maintain. Your father always preferred to handle issues on Redwood Falls soil by himself." She exhaled sharply. "I get that, but with my parents gone, maybe it's time for Redwood Falls to set aside pride and ask for real help. I can't just wait around hoping my father shows up. Every minute matters." Grayson placed a hand on her shoulder, sympathy crossing his features. "There might be a simpler explanation," he offered, though his tone lacked conviction. "Perhaps they left in a hurry to chase a lead. Your father has been known to take risks for the sake of the pack." Calla appreciated the attempt at reassurance, but dread remained. Would they vanish without telling anyone? That's not like them. I agree, Grayson sighed. I came by to make sure you arrived safely and to let you know that everyone in Redwood Falls is on alert. Some patrols are doubling shifts, but we lack the manpower of the Bloodfang Pack. Tension is high. Calla rubbed her arms, struggling to ward off the chill that clung to the house. She recalled her rebellious youth, how she had refused to kneel before fate when she realized that the powerful and intimidating Alpha Ryker Thorn was her mate. Rejecting him had been an act of defiance, or at least that's what she had told herself. But as time passed, she often wondered if fear had played a bigger role than her desire for independence. The mate bond was no trivial thing in werewolf culture. Breaking it carried consequences for both involved. She prayed that her parents' disappearance wasn't one of those repercussions. Yet rationally, she knew Redwood Falls faced a threat that extended beyond old romantic entanglements. Thanks for checking on me, she told Grayson. I might need your help soon. If we can't figure out what happened, I'll have to find another option. He pursed his lips. Another option meaning the Bloodfang Pack? He paused, eyes shadowed with concern. Be careful, Calla. Ryker Thorn has changed in the last few years. They say he's grown far more powerful, forging alliances with distant packs and brokering deals that expand Bloodfang territory. Some call him Alpha of Alphas now, though he's not one for boasting. He might accept you back into his domain, or he might see you as someone who once turned her back on him. She swallowed, remembering the harsh finality of her rejection. I'll be cautious. My focus is on my parents. Whatever happens with Riker, it's secondary. Grayson nodded, then turned to leave. Good luck, he said quietly. If you need me, send word. For now, I'll keep digging for clues. With that, she was alone once more, standing in the silent foyer of her parents' house. She felt the weight of Redwood Falls upon her shoulders, as if the entire place had grown more foreboding since her departure. The night deepened, rain pattering against the windows with a steady rhythm that grated on her nerves. She forced herself upstairs to her old bedroom, hoping the familiar space might calm her before she made a plan. As she stepped inside, she caught sight of faint outlines in the dust, old posters on the wall, a bookshelf containing novels she had once cherished, the bed neatly made as if awaiting her return. She placed her suitcase on the floor, sank onto the mattress, and stared into the darkness. Memories of the evening she first sensed Riker Thorn's presence at a pack gathering surfaced, his intense gaze, the magnetic pull, and the crushing panic she felt at the possibility of being bound for life before she even understood herself. She shut her eyes, forcing the thoughts away. There was no use dwelling on the past. Her priority was the here and now. If Redwood Falls was in danger, if her parents were caught in some web of rogue plots or something far worse, she had to act. That meant swallowing her pride and perhaps facing Riker. Beneath her anger and regret, a faint surge of longing twisted inside her, but she silenced it before it could grow. She refused to let old feelings cloud her. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go to Bloodfang territory. That was her best chance. Even if Riker slammed the door in her face, she owed it to her parents to try. There was no guarantee of success, but Redwood Falls was small and threatened. She clung to the hope that perhaps the mate bond, though it was severed, might still lend her some small advantage if she found herself confronted by his pack's formidable defenses. She prayed he would at least listen before casting her out. The night passed slowly. She tossed and turned, haunted by vivid dreams of dark forests, flickering shapes in the corner of her vision, and distant howls echoing across moonlit clearings. She kept seeing her parents, calling her name, only for their voices to vanish as she turned to find them. Each time she jolted awake, it took her heart a minute to steady, each beat a painful thud of dread. By the time dawn arrived, she had barely slept. She crawled out of bed, took a quick shower in a bathroom that felt both comforting and eerie, then threw on jeans, boots, and a jacket. The entire house felt suffocating with the emptiness of her parents' absence. She packed a small bag with essentials, her phone charger, a few changes of clothes, took the keys to her father's old car from the kitchen drawer, and stepped outside. The morning air was damp and cool, though the rain had ceased. A hazy sun tried to break through the lingering clouds, bathing Redwood Falls in a muted golden glow. She drove along the narrow roads that led out of town, past sparse neighborhoods, the local high school, and eventually the open fields that gave way to thick forests. Occasionally, she spotted a neighbor or a passerby who recognized her behind the windshield, but no one waved. She felt the unspoken weight of Redwood Falls' eyes upon her, like a presence that judged her for returning in the midst of crisis and possibly stirring up old conflicts. She tried to shake off the tension, focusing on the plan. Get to Bloodfang territory, ask for an audience with Alpha Ryker Thorn, and beg for his help in finding her parents. The journey took her out of Redwood Falls and along a lonely two-lane highway. She remembered traveling these roads countless times, whether for family errands or to sneak away for some weekend adventure. Now, each mile heightened her anxiety. She wasn't certain how to best approach Bloodfang territory. Rumor had it that Riker's pack had grown more sophisticated in its security measures, with patrols posted at various outposts. The last thing she needed was a confrontation with his wolves before she could plead her case. At the junction leading onto a winding back road, she pulled off to the side, shut off the engine, and studied a tattered map she found in the glove compartment. On it, Redwood Falls was labeled simply, and Bloodfang territory was circled in thick red marker. It was bigger than she recalled, a testament to how far Riker's influence had spread. She flipped open her phone, hoping to find better directions, but the signal was spotty. Without another choice, she started the car again, following the path deeper into forested land that gradually grew denser, old pines and oaks pressing in on both sides. Eventually, the road narrowed to a dirt track. She felt the tires slip on muddy patches. The forest canopy overhead filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns of green and gold. Anxiety gnawed at her. She half expected a wolf to leap out from behind a tree or for a patrol to stop her. But the area remained quiet, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under her wheels and the soft hum of the engine. Then, in the distance, she spotted a sign that read, Bloodfang Pack territory. No trespassers beyond this point. Her heart hammered. She stopped the car, turned off the ignition, and stepped onto the dirt. The sense of heightened awareness coursed through her, instincts honed from her werewolf heritage telling her that she was no longer on neutral ground. "All right," she murmured under her breath, looking around at the silent woods. Time to face him. She took a steadying breath and walked forward. The wind rustled the treetops, carrying a faint, earthy scent. She picked up an aroma of wolf musk, so she knew she was being watched. Sure enough, moments later, two wolves emerged from behind a cluster of thick oaks. Their hackles bristled, and they bared their teeth, but they made no immediate attack. One of them growled, low and warning. "I come in peace," Calla called, lifting her hands. She focused on speaking with authority, yet not aggression. These wolves likely recognized Redwood Falls' scent on her, or at least something akin to it. She had her father's lineage in her blood, even if she was no true alpha. One wolf snarled louder, but the other shifted, a swirl of bone and fur, until a tall man with short dark hair stood before her, eyes gleaming gold with his beast's presence still near the surface. "State your business," he demanded, voice sharp. "I'm Calla Monroe. My family is from Redwood Falls. I need to speak with Alpha Ryker Thorn about my missing parents. It's urgent." She braced herself, half expecting them to dismiss her or to question her further. But the man's eyes flickered with recognition of her surname. The tension in his shoulders did not lessen, but he gestured for her to follow him. "I'll escort you. Keep your hands visible and your voice down." The other wolf maintained a low growl, circling her at a distance. She caught glimpses of powerful muscles beneath dark fur. Clearly, the stories of the Bloodfang Pack's impressive might were more than rumors. She complied, letting the man lead her along a narrow trail that snaked deeper into the forest. Perhaps they had been instructed to be vigilant for any Redwood Falls visitors. She could only guess how many strangers dared to approach Bloodfang territory unannounced. It wasn't long before they reached a tall gate that seemed to emerge from the dense wall of trees. The structure, built of sturdy logs and reinforced with metal, framed a large clearing beyond. She glimpsed a collection of buildings and cabins, each crafted from timber, smoke curling faintly from chimneys. The guard at the gate, another werewolf, gave her a suspicious look, but the man who had shifted spoke quietly to him, presumably explaining the situation. Her heart pounded as they led her to the largest structure at the end of a wide path. It looked like a lodge, with expansive windows and a front porch that suggested a meeting hall or Alpha's quarters. Wolves and shifters passed, some casting her inquisitive stares, some ignoring her entirely as they carried supplies or patrolled. It felt like an efficient, close-knit community, humming with activity and shared purpose. Inside the lodge, the man guided her down a dim hallway lined with trophies, paintings, and old pack memorabilia. At a carved wooden door, he paused. "Wait here," he instructed before stepping inside. She couldn't hear much from within, only the faint murmur of voices. Moments later, the door opened again. The man motioned for her to enter. She did so, nerves taut. The space beyond was a wide office with a high ceiling supported by exposed beams. Bookcases lined one wall, containing binders, scrolls, and other documents. Near the far side stood a large desk, papers scattered across it. But what seized her full attention was the man behind that desk, Ryker Thorn. He was taller than she remembered, shoulders broader, his stance more grounded in power. He wore dark jeans and a black long-sleeved shirt that clung to his muscular frame. His hair, once close-cropped, now fell in subtle waves that brushed his collar, and a faint scar traced across one eyebrow. The moment his gaze met hers, her pulse skittered. His eyes were a stormy gray, unblinking in their intensity, and in them she saw surprise flicker before being replaced by a hardened mask. She could almost sense the swirl of emotions he tried to bury. Her stomach twisted with a blend of guilt, fear, and something she dared not name. "Well," Riker said after a long beat, his voice deep, laced with a quiet authority. "Look who finally decided to show up in my territory." She caught a subtle movement of his jaw, a telltale sign that he was either annoyed or struggling with something. The presence of the man who brought her in loomed at her shoulder. She resisted the urge to shrink under Riker's scrutinizing gaze, remembering she had come with a purpose. "I'm sorry to barge in without notice," Calla said, her tone firm despite her trembling pulse. "But my parents are missing. Redwood Falls is in trouble. I need your help." A tense silence settled. Riker took a step from behind the desk, crossing his arms over his chest. "You need my help," he echoed. skepticism coloring his words. After 3 years of ignoring the mate bond, you suddenly want to talk alliances? She steeled herself. She couldn't expect civility right away. This isn't about alliances, she clarified, though that might have been a half-truth. It's about my parents. They vanished without a trace, and Redwood Falls is witnessing strange occurrences. There are rumors of rogues or worse. You have the resources to aid in a search, resources Redwood Falls lacks. His gaze darkened. And you assume I'll just hand them over, because you showed up at my doorstep. She fought the sting in her chest. I'm not assuming anything. I'm asking for your mercy. Riker stared at her for a beat, then glanced at the subordinate still standing close. Leave us, he ordered curtly. The man gave a nod and exited. When the door shut, Riker turned his full attention to Calla. She tried to steady her breathing as his eyes swept over her from head to toe. Standing only a few feet away from him, she felt the intensity of his aura. The bond she had rejected twitched at the edges of her awareness. Even though she had fought against it for years, she couldn't deny a faint pull whenever she stood near him, like gravity shifting. Start from the beginning, Riker said at last, his voice losing some of its sharpness. Tell me exactly what happened to your parents, and how Redwood Falls is connected to these rumors. She launched into a detailed account, how she arrived to find the house empty, the cryptic gossip about sightings on the eastern border, Grayson's uncertainty, the absolute absence of any message from her parents. As she spoke, she kept her tone factual, forcing herself not to appear desperate or manipulative. Riker listened quietly, occasionally nodding or folding his arms more tightly across his chest. She detected flickers of concern in his expression, but they were fleeting, overshadowed by a guarded distance. When she finished, he prowled a few steps away, raking a hand through his dark hair. We've had our share of issues lately, he said, facing a wall map pinned with various markers. Rogue sightings, yes, but also rumors of a more organized faction operating outside recognized pack lines. They're not allied with Bloodfang or Redwood Falls, nor do they adhere to any known pack's customs. We've lost a few scouts who ventured too far. Your father was no stranger to investigating suspicious activity, especially if Redwood Falls was threatened. A spark of hope flared within her. That must be it. If he uncovered something, he and my mother might have been taken. Or they could be hiding. She swallowed, forcing herself to remain calm. If you have any leads on this faction, anything that could point to where they might be operating, it could help me find them. I'll do whatever it takes. Riker spun to face her again, leaning against the desk. You'll do whatever it takes? He repeated, voice tinged with cynicism. That's a big promise coming from the woman who once told me she wouldn't let me or my pack dictate her future. You demanded your freedom then. What changed? Her chest constricted. She deserved that jab, though it still hurt. My parents are all I have left of Redwood Falls, she said quietly, and Redwood Falls was my home long before I knew of the mate bond. I might have turned my back on you, but I didn't turn my back on them. He studied her, silent. She sensed a conflict behind his eyes, as though he battled old wounds and new responsibilities. The tension stretched until he let out a slow exhale. I can't ignore potential threats near my borders, he said, nor can I ignore the disappearance of 2 people who were once close allies. I'll help Redwood Falls, but under my terms. There's too much at stake for me to do anything less. She felt relief mixed with trepidation. Your terms? She echoed warily. Consider it an alliance of convenience, Riker replied, his tone clipped. I'll place some of my best trackers on this. In return, you'll remain in my territory, cooperating with my pack until we get answers. That means no going off on your own, no withholding information, and no reneging on your promises if this situation becomes bigger than anticipated. Redwood Falls is vulnerable, and if these troublemakers are as organized as I suspect, we may both have to defend our lands. She hesitated, the reality of surrendering any semblance of independence gnawing at her. Yet she had no alternatives. Agreed, she said, voice trembling only slightly. I just want my parents safe. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again, as he pushed away from the desk. I'll assign someone to show you a room. You'll stay here in the main lodge. I can't trust Redwood Falls to keep you safe if these enemies are already striking the area. You want to help your parents? Then do as I say. She nodded, swallowing her pride. It stung to be spoken to like a subordinate, but desperation overshadowed hurt. Thank you, she murmured. He pressed a button on an intercom near his desk, calling for a pack member to escort her. When he turned back, their eyes locked for a moment. She thought she sensed 1,000 unspoken words in that glance. The regrets, the anger, the history that bound them, severed though it was. Before anything could be said, the office door opened, and a tall woman entered, bowing her head slightly to Riker, before glancing at Calla with faint curiosity. Take Calla to the guest wing, Riker instructed the woman. Provide her whatever she needs. Yes, Alpha. The woman motioned politely for Calla to follow. Calla walked toward the door, aware of Riker's gaze on her back. She forced herself not to look over her shoulder, although part of her yearned to. This was only the start of a path she never intended to travel. One paved with old wounds, new dangers, and no guarantee of redemption. The guest wing corridor was lined with thick rugs, polished wood paneling, and softly glowing lights. The woman leading her was named Elise, and she moved with a calm efficiency that suggested a person used to giving and receiving orders within a disciplined pack. She led Calla to a modest room containing a bed, desk, dresser, and adjoining bathroom. The window overlooked a clearing where a handful of wolves padded quietly, going about their midday tasks. Elise left Calla with a parting nod, shutting the door gently behind her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Calla tried to gather her thoughts. She replayed the conversation with Riker, analyzing his every word and expression. She recalled the day she had stood in Redwood Falls, trembling, as she uttered her official rejection of him. His rage that day was silent, simmering below the surface, yet she felt it in the intensity of his eyes. It was a gamble she took, for her own sense of freedom. Now, she had no idea if he'd ever forgive her, if forgiveness was even a consideration. She had bigger issues than personal drama, though. Her parents' fates dangled in jeopardy, and Redwood Falls itself could be on the brink of invasion or sabotage. Despite her turmoil, she felt the faintest spark of reassurance that, under Riker's watch, a rescue mission stood a chance. The Bloodfang Pack was known for its strategic prowess, and Riker, from all accounts, had only grown in reputation and power. Tugging off her boots, she realized how exhausted she was from the emotional whirlwind of the past days. She didn't trust that she could sleep, but she allowed herself to lie down, staring at the ceiling beams. Her mind drifted through the possible scenarios of her parents being held captive, or lost in some hidden lair, or forced to flee Redwood Falls. She shuddered, pulling the blankets around her, trying to ward off the images. Eventually, she dozed off, her last waking thought the conflicted memory of Riker's voice and the small, unspoken piece of her heart that still recognized him as something more than just an old mistake. The next few days were filled with uneasy waiting. Riker gave her minimal updates, typically passed along through pack messengers or Elise. She learned that scouts were dispatched to Redwood Falls' outer borders, seeking any leads about the group rumored to be lurking in the shadows. Each evening, she felt the tension in the lodge rise as wolves returned with meager findings or, worse, no findings at all. Restlessness gnawed at Calla. She hated feeling dependent on the generosity of a pack she once spurned, even though everyone treated her with a polite distance. On the third morning, she mustered the courage to knock on Riker's office door herself, determined to be more proactive. She stepped inside upon his terse invitation and found him pacing behind his desk, muscular arms crossed. A map lay spread across the surface, dotted with colored pins. He barely glanced up at her entrance, fixated on the lines and markings. "Any news?" she asked carefully, keeping her voice firm. He pinned a pin on the map near Redwood Falls. Scouts encountered signs of a struggle east of Redwood Falls. Broken branches, disturbed earth, lingering scents that didn't match typical rogues. "Looks more like an organized party. They're traveling in small groups, using stealth. No direct trail leading to your parents." Calla's heart sank. "But it confirms someone is operating on Redwood Falls' borders." He nodded curtly. "Which puts my territory at risk as well. If Redwood Falls falls, these intruders might expand. That cannot happen." She approached the desk, frowning at the map. "My father was thorough with note-taking. There has to be some record of suspicious activity in the Redwood Falls archives. If I could go back there," he shot her a sharp look. "Absolutely not alone." She bristled. "I'm not suggesting I go unescorted, but Redwood Falls Town Hall and my parents' personal study might hold clues. If my father suspected infiltration, he might have documented it. I know his methods better than anyone." Riker's jaw clenched. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse outright, but then he reached for a radio on the desk and called for Elise. When Elise entered, Riker relayed a curt directive. "Arrange a small team to accompany Calla to Redwood Falls. They'll investigate her father's study and local records for any sign of infiltration. She doesn't leave their sight." Elise nodded, sending Calla a look of curiosity. "Understood, Alpha." Relief flooded Calla, though her pride felt a pang at his overprotective approach. She turned back to Riker. "Thank you. I promise I'll share everything we find." He held her gaze. "Do that. I'm assigning 4 of my best wolves to guard you. If anything goes wrong, if you sense a trap, you call for them before leaping into danger." He paused, voice dropping lower. "I won't risk them for your impulsiveness." She swallowed. "I understand." His eyes lingered on her, an emotion flickering too quickly to identify. Then he waved a dismissive hand, returning his focus to the map. Calla followed Elise out, her mind a swirl of dread and determination. She would soon be back in Redwood Falls, searching for any lead that could save her parents, while under the watch of a pack whose leader she had hurt. If that wasn't a twisted piece of irony, she didn't know what was. Elise arranged the expedition swiftly, demonstrating the Bloodfang Pack's discipline. Early the next morning, 4 wolves, 2 men, 2 women, met Calla in the lodge's courtyard just after dawn. Each carried a small backpack for supplies. Elise, tall and calm, took point, briefing them on their mission. Escort Calla to Redwood Falls, search Beta Monroe's personal records, and return with any relevant information on the potential faction operating near Crod. The border. Calla felt a mix of gratitude and anxiety as she surveyed these strangers who were risking themselves to help her family. She tried to smile in greeting, but the tension on her face probably made her look more nervous than welcoming. Elise introduced the others. Devon, a quiet man with sandy hair who had tracking expertise, Naomi, a quick-witted scout with excellent hearing, and Hector, a broad-shouldered fighter who radiated a protective aura. They all addressed her politely, though with a certain professional reserve. She figured her status as the Alpha's rejected mate likely cast a shadow over any easy camaraderie. They set out at first light. Elise and Hector shifted into their wolf forms to run alongside the SUV that Calla, Devon, and Naomi took through the forest roads. Calla sat in the back seat, mind racing with potential scenarios. She wondered if Redwood Falls had changed again in the few days since she last saw it. Perhaps new rumors of this threat had emerged, or more disappearances had occurred. She reminded herself that time was precious, and any records her father left behind might be the key to unmasking the group's motives and location. The sun rose higher as they approached the outskirts of Redwood Falls. The SUV rumbled along the old roads, passing weathered houses and shops. A few townspeople eyed the vehicle warily. They recognized Bloodfang wolves by their scents or attire. Redwood Falls and Bloodfang had coexisted in a delicate balance, but there was no denying a certain wariness on Redwood Falls' side. Calla felt the tension as they pulled up in front of her parents' home. Elise and Hector joined them, shifting back into human form with a practiced fluidity behind a stand of bushes. She noticed how discreet they were, no sense in alarming the entire neighborhood. The house stood silent, almost forlorn. Calla unlocked the door and led the team inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, memories assaulted her. Warm laughter, her mother scolding when she came home late, her father's stern lectures about being responsible with her gifts. She pushed the recollections aside and turned to Elise, who scanned the interior with a watchful eye. "We'll start with your father's study," Elise said. "Then we can check any other rooms where he might have hidden documents." Calla nodded and led them down the hallway. The study looked as it had the last time she searched it, except for a layer of dust that hinted no one had disturbed the space. Devon took position at the door, while Naomi and Hector began systematically combing through shelves, notes, and drawers. Elise examined the desk, sifting carefully through a stack of old ledgers. Calla moved to a tall bookshelf at the back of the room. She remembered her father once built a false compartment behind certain books, though she didn't know which shelf. She ran her fingers along the spines, searching for any irregularity. Her heart pounded with each attempt, half expecting to discover something hidden that would confirm her worst fears, or maybe give her a lifeline. Her hand caught on a loose book that wiggled in an odd way. Carefully, she pulled it free, revealing a small latch behind it. Her breath caught. She tugged on the latch, and a narrow section of the bookshelf swung outward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a slim folder, unmarked and secured by a fraying rubber band. "I think I found something," she announced, glancing over her shoulder at the others. Naomi and Hector paused to look. Elise crossed the room, leaning in to see the folder. "Good work," Elise said, taking the folder gently from Calla's hands. "Let's see what your father was protecting." They laid the folder on the desk and carefully removed the band. Inside were several sheets of paper, each covered in Beta Monroe's distinctive handwriting. The first page had a list of dates and times, accompanied by notations about suspicious sightings near Redwood Falls. Some entries mentioned dark shapes at night, reports from farmers who swore they saw multiple individuals lurking in the woods. The second page was more revealing, describing patterns that suggested the intruders weren't scattered rogues. They appeared coordinated, employing a rotation of watchers who never approached Redwood Falls openly. Certain passages read, "These are not typical rogues. They exhibit discipline. They move under cover of darkness and leave few tracks. I suspect a leader guiding them. Redwood Falls may be a test site for infiltration strategies, or a stepping stone to bigger targets. Must gather more intel. Calla's hands trembled as she turned to the next page. It contained references to old alliances Redwood Falls once had, including small agreements with Bloodfang in past generations. Her father's handwriting underlined a key line: if Redwood Falls falls, or if we fail to act, the next target could be Bloodfang. The scale of their operation suggests an organized cell with unknown backers. Potential for blackmail or kidnapping is high. Must warn them, but carefully. They might already be compromised elsewhere. Her throat tightened. If her father wrote this, he knew enough to fear a direct assault. He must have tried to warn Redwood Falls Council, but, evidently, something got in the way. This has to be connected to their disappearance, Calla murmured. He found out too much. Elise exchanged glances with Naomi, then looked at Calla. This aligns with some of the intel we gathered in Bloodfang territory. We suspected an external threat, but your father seems to have compiled thorough evidence. This group must have realized he was onto them. Hector, arms crossed, frowned. They might have abducted him for the information he had. They might also be using Redwood Falls as a forward base to stage an attack on Bloodfang or other packs. We need to bring these documents back to Riker. Calla nodded, relief and dread warring within her. This folder was confirmation that Redwood Falls was in serious jeopardy. Even if the Council didn't want outside help in the past, they couldn't continue ignoring the threat. We should check if there's more, she suggested, looking around the study. Maybe hidden somewhere else. They continued searching. Although they uncovered a few more pages of notes in another drawer, none were as comprehensive as the hidden folder. Collecting everything, Elise announced it was time to leave, the mission accomplished. But as they headed down the hallway, Calla paused by her mother's sewing room, an unexpected wave of emotion halting her steps. She recalled how she used to sit on a stool, watching her mother mend or create new clothing, always humming softly under her breath. Now, the room was dark, threads and fabric strewn on a table as if left mid-project. "Can I have a moment?" she asked softly, turning to Elise. Elise hesitated. Concern flickered in her gaze, but she nodded. "We'll wait in the living room. Don't linger too long. We need to get this intel back to the Alpha." Calla stepped inside the sewing room, exhaling shakily as she ran her fingers over folded cloth. She could almost hear her mother's voice, full of gentle admonitions and laughter. Her chest tightened with longing. If only she had visited more often after leaving. Perhaps she might have noticed the looming danger, helped warn them. Guilt twinged in her gut. She had told herself Redwood Falls was better off without the scandal of a broken mate bond overshadowing the pack. Now, she wondered if her choice had isolated her parents. Brushing aside those regrets, she left the sewing room to rejoin Elise and the others. They gave her sympathetic nods, then escorted her outside. The sun was climbing toward midday, bathing Redwood Falls in a subdued radiance. The group quickly piled into the SUV, with Elise and Hector shifting back into wolf form to run ahead as an advance guard. Devon took the driver's seat, while Naomi scanned the surroundings. Despite Redwood Falls' calm exterior, Calla noted suspicious glances from a few townspeople. News traveled fast in a small community, and the sight of Bloodfang wolves might spark more rumors. The drive out of Redwood Falls was tense. Naomi kept checking the side mirrors, as if expecting to be followed. Calla stared out the window, her thoughts drifting between her father's hidden documents and the man who once promised her a life bound by destiny. Their destinies seemed to collide again, in a far more dangerous way. They navigated the winding roads, eventually leaving the outskirts behind for dense forest territory. Elise and Hector, in wolf form, loped gracefully through the woods, paralleling the SUV's route. Everything seemed routine. Until, about halfway to Bloodfang land, the radio Devon kept on the console crackled to life. A static-filled voice cut through, spotted movement on the northern ridge. Possibly hostiles. Caution. Devon stiffened, eyes flicking to Naomi in the passenger seat. She snatched the radio. Copy that. We're escorting the Redwood Falls contact. Do we need to reroute? Another burst of static. Not certain. Keep your eyes open. The tension in the SUV soared. Calla felt her heart leap into her throat. Devon pressed the accelerator, speeding along the dirt road as the forest blurred. She glanced out the rear window, fear prickling her senses. Could these intruders have tracked them from Redwood Falls? Elise and Hector's wolf forms appeared occasionally in the trees, muscles bunched as they ran. Their presence offered some reassurance, but the forest felt suddenly menacing. Shadows lengthened, and every rustle of branches set Calla on edge. Minutes later, a series of low, echoing howls reverberated from deeper in the woods. The hairs on the back of Calla's neck stood up. Naomi's gaze darted to Devon. "Those aren't ours," she muttered grimly. "Keep moving." The radio crackled again with frantic shouting. "We're under attack!" Eastern Post. Then it cut off. The tension in the car became electric. Devon gritted his teeth, focusing on the path. Blood pounded in Calla's ears. The forest was now alive with an undercurrent of hostility. Abruptly, Hector's wolf form bounded onto the road in front of them, forcing Devon to brake hard. Hector crouched, panting, his ears flat, as Elise joined him. They both seemed agitated. Naomi lowered her window and called out, "What's happening?" Hector shifted, grimacing as the transformation finished. "We have an incursion near the route. Alpha's orders are for us to take a detour. The main path might be compromised." Naomi nodded, relaying that to Devon. The SUV backed up, turning onto a narrow side trail used primarily for logging. Elise and Hector shifted back to wolves, leading the way at a run. The radio sputtered with brief transmissions about unknown aggressors pressuring the Bloodfang border. The scale of this was bigger than a lone rogue causing trouble. The detour path twisted through thick undergrowth, tree branches scraping the sides of the vehicle. The engine struggled on the uneven terrain. Twice, Calla jerked against her seatbelt as the SUV dipped into deep ruts. Tension soared, her mind conjuring images of shadowy figures waiting to ambush them. Meanwhile, Elise and Hector darted ahead, their silhouettes weaving between the trunks. Just when she started to believe they might avoid conflict, a chaotic flurry of movement erupted on the right side of the trail. A group of wolves, lean, savage-looking, with ragged coats, burst from the underbrush, snarling. Calla's pulse slammed at the sight of their bared teeth and glaring eyes. They hurled themselves at Elise and Hector, who engaged instantly, powerful snarls ringing out. The SUV screeched to a halt, Devon reaching for a rifle from the back seat. Naomi threw open her door, brandishing a pistol loaded with tranquilizer rounds. "Stay inside," she barked at Calla before sliding out. Outside, the forest erupted into chaos. Elise and Hector tackled two of the attackers, their jaws snapping. Fur flew as they grappled. The rogue wolves were cunning, trying to flank them. Naomi aimed her pistol, firing a shot that hissed into a rogue's flank, causing it to stagger. Devon took position near the SUV's front, rifle raised. Calla's instincts screamed for her to help, but she knew she lacked the training these wolves had. She tried to scan the perimeter for any sign of more assailants. A faint movement at the corner of her vision caught her attention. A figure creeping behind a tree, aiming some kind of crossbow. Her stomach lurched. One bolt could kill Elise or Hector if it hit them at the wrong angle. Clutching the door handle, she shouted, "Behind the oak! Crossbow!" Devon swung his rifle in that direction, firing. The shot ricocheted off bark, sending the hidden assailant diving for cover. The tension soared as Elise and Hector managed to overpower another rogue, forcing it to retreat, but the crossbow wielder let loose a bolt that whistled dangerously close to Elise's flank. Calla covered her mouth, heart hammering. She saw Elise stagger, though it might have been from exertion rather than a hit. Naomi took aim, firing another tranquilizer dart that struck a second rogue in the side. The creature let out a pained yelp and crashed into the bushes. Two more rogues, seeing the tide turn, bolted back into the dense forest. The crossbow wielder vanished into the shadows. Elise and Hector growled, chasing them a short distance before returning. Within minutes, the ambush ended. The battered clearing stood eerily silent, except for the heavy panting of wolves and the rustle of disturbed foliage. Elise and Hector, still in wolf form, bore minor injuries, small cuts and patches of matted fur. Naomi and Devon scanned the surroundings, weapons ready. Calla stepped out of the SUV, her legs trembling. Elise approached, shifting back to human form. She clenched her teeth, wincing at a scratch on her shoulder. "We need to keep moving," she said. "That was likely a scouting party." Calla nodded, dread washing over her. Scouting for who? Hector, returning to human form, scowled. "Probably the same faction your father was investigating. They're prowling these borders now, testing Bloodfang's defenses." Naomi hurried to the SUV, yanking open the trunk to retrieve a first aid kit. She offered it to Hector, who began patching up Elise's wound. Devon reloaded his rifle. The group was silent, the weight of this encounter pressing down. Calla shivered in the aftermath, mind grappling with the reality of nearly being caught in a lethal attack. She realized how close Redwood Falls was to being overrun, how urgent it was that the Bloodfang Pack and Redwood Falls coordinate. Whatever mistrust or rivalries existed might soon be overshadowed by a bigger threat that spared no one. After quickly tending to injuries, they piled back into the vehicle, the wolves occasionally checking the perimeter. Devon took the wheel again, carefully navigating the rest of the winding route. Tension remained thick, everyone ready for another ambush. But the forest stayed quiet, as if the attackers had retreated to regroup. Eventually, they re-entered Bloodfang territory and emerged onto a more secure road. Guards at a checkpoint waved them through after verifying their identities. The SUV rumbled into the Bloodfang Pack's main compound, an area of neat cabins and buildings that nestled in a broad clearing. Though the place looked peaceful, signs of heightened security were everywhere. Patrols pacing the perimeter, watchers stationed at vantage points, and an air of alertness in every step. Calla recalled Redwood Falls never felt this militarized, but it also never faced such direct threats. Elise, Hector, Naomi, and Devon escorted Calla straight to the central lodge. Inside, they guided her to Riker's office, ignoring their own cuts and bruises in favor of delivering the intelligence as soon as possible. Two guards outside the office stepped aside at Elise's nod, and the group entered. Ryker Thorn stood at a wide window, arms crossed over his chest, deep in conversation with another pack member. At their entrance, he turned abruptly, silver-gray eyes scanning the new arrivals. His features hardened when he noticed Elise's injury. "What happened?" "Ambush on the way back," Elise responded, voice tart. "A group of rogues, possibly more organized than standard loners. We managed to hold them off." Riker's expression darkened, an aura of controlled fury emanating from him. He strode forward, giving Elise and Hector a quick once-over. "Are you both fit enough to report now?" Elise nodded. "Minor wounds. We can manage." Riker's gaze flickered to Calla, as if assessing her for injuries too. She felt a flutter of confusion at his concern, but his face was composed when he turned back to Elise. "Give me the details." Hector stepped forward, recounting the ambush succinctly. The crossbow wielder, the timing, the possible link to the intruders operating around Redwood Falls. Then, Elise handed Riker the hidden folder. "Beta Monroe's personal documents," she explained. He compiled a detailed account of suspicious activity leading up to his disappearance. Riker took the folder and spread the pages across his desk. His jaw tensed as he read the notes, eyes narrowing. Seconds passed in heavy silence, the only sound the scratch of paper as he flipped through the entries. Finally, he looked at Calla, expression unreadable. "Your father was onto something significant," he said. He recognized a threat bigger than either Redwood Falls or Bloodfang alone. Calla nodded. "Yes. He believed they have a leader who's organizing different rogue cells. That might explain why they're attacking border outposts instead of going for random raids. They're testing defenses, maybe planning a larger invasion." Riker drummed his fingers on the desk, scanning one particular line. "He mentions kidnapping as a tactic for extracting information. That makes it likely your parents were taken rather than..." He trailed off, leaving the darker possibility unsaid. Calla swallowed. Kidnapping was at least a scenario in which her parents might still be alive. He turned his fierce gaze on the group. "With Redwood Falls compromised, this threat is practically on our doorstep. I'll escalate our patrols and coordinate with Redwood Falls, whether their council likes it or not. Elise, arrange for a strategic meeting. Tonight, with my top advisors." He glanced to Hector and the others. "Get yourselves cleaned up, and have the medics check your injuries." They saluted with respectful nods, heading out. Riker's intensity bore into Calla as he turned to her. "We'll need Redwood Falls leadership at that meeting as well, but they've been stubborn before. You'll help persuade them." She pressed her lips together, recalling Redwood Falls' pride. "I'll do my best. Their first concern is their missing Beta and his mate. If we can prove cooperation gives them a better chance of recovering my parents, they'll come around." Riker nodded, face stern. "In the meantime, you stay here, within my territory. Given the ambush, it's not safe for you to travel back and forth." A flicker of relief and frustration churned in her. She wanted to do more, but the memory of that crossbow bolt whistling past Elise's flank told her she might only be a liability out there. "All right," she murmured. "If it helps keep me alive to keep searching, I'll stay." He studied her for a moment, the tension in his expression softening infinitesimally. "Rest for now. You've been through enough today." Calla hesitated. She wanted to ask if he had any personal updates about her parents, or if he still harbored anger over their severed bond, but she remained silent. This wasn't the time for personal confessions. She turned to leave, heart still pounding from the ambush. He called her name softly, just once. She looked back. His eyes held a glimmer of something almost apologetic before he resumed a mask of composure. "Thank you for risking yourself to retrieve these documents." She offered a nod, swallowing the ache in her throat. "They're my parents," she whispered. "I'd do anything." Then she stepped out, the door closing behind her with an echo that lingered in her chest. In the hours that followed, Calla felt the hustle of the Bloodfang compound ramp up. Wolves prepared for increased patrols, and strategy discussions took place behind closed doors. She spent most of the afternoon in her assigned room, trying to quell the surge of anxious energy thrumming through her limbs. Visions of the ambush replayed in her mind, along with the chilling possibility that her parents were captive of a foe powerful enough to threaten even the Bloodfang Pack. Eventually, a soft knock on her door snapped her out of her thoughts. She opened it to find Elise, her arm now bandaged but her posture still confident. "The Alpha wants you at the strategy meeting," Elise said. "Representing Redwood Falls, in a sense." Calla felt a nervous twist in her gut. "I'm not an official council member," Elise shook her head. "You have your father's ear, and you're the one who brought the documents. That's enough." With a deep breath, Calla followed Elise through the corridors to a large meeting room that featured a heavy wooden table and several chairs arranged in a rectangle. Riker stood at the head of the table, flanked by wolves of various ranks. She recognized a few from the earlier patrols and suspected the others were key advisors and lieutenants. The atmosphere was tense, voices hushed as they spoke about infiltration tactics and possible safe routes to Redwood Falls. Riker beckoned for Calla to take a seat beside Elise. She lowered herself, trying not to fidget under the curious stares of the pack's inner circle. One by one, they gave reports or updates from the day's events. Several had heard about the ambush, and there were conflicting theories. Some believed the rogues aimed to cut off communication between Redwood Falls and Bloodfang, while others suspected the faction was testing Bloodfang's readiness. Finally, Riker gestured to the folder recovered from Redwood Falls. "This is the most solid lead we have," he stated, placing a hand on the stack of papers. "Beta Monroe believed the group is well organized, possibly backed by a wealthy benefactor. He also believed they'd use hostages to force smaller packs into compliance." A dark-haired woman across the table, a senior scout named Aurelia, exhaled sharply. "If Redwood Falls is as small as we've always considered it, it would be a relatively easy target. They might try to turn it into a puppet territory, then set their sights on Bloodfang. We need a plan to counter that." Riker nodded. "Agreed. We need Redwood Falls on our side, and we need to find Beta Monroe and his mate. Without them, Redwood Falls leadership is weak and vulnerable. We'll attempt direct communication with Redwood Falls Council tomorrow. If they're hesitant, we'll show them these documents," Elise spoke up. "If Redwood Falls Council insists on independence, do we force an alliance?" A murmur spread around the table. Bloodfang's approach was rarely about brute-forcing neighbors unless absolutely necessary. Riker eyed the group, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "We persuade them first. If that fails, we consider other avenues. Redwood Falls is a buffer between us and potential invaders to the east. We can't let it become a foothold for an enemy." Through it all, Calla sat quietly, absorbing the gravity of the discussion. Riker was orchestrating a multi-pronged defense, balancing alliances, resources, and the threat of internal sabotage. She realized just how formidable he had become. An alpha bearing not only the power of his own pack, but also the burden of protecting an entire region. The man she rejected at 18 had grown into a leader whose influence stretched far. At last, Riker shifted his focus to Calla. "Do you have any input from Redwood Falls' perspective? Anything that might sway the council?" She cleared her throat. "They respect my father more than almost anyone. His disappearance is a shock. If you present them with evidence that Bloodfang can help, and that it's the best chance to rescue him, they'll have to listen. Perhaps if I accompany your envoy. It'll add weight." Riker steadied her for a moment, expression reflecting an internal calculation. "Very well," he said. "Tomorrow, you'll accompany me to Redwood Falls. We'll speak with whatever interim leadership they have. If we're lucky, this will go smoothly. If not, we'll still have to proceed. The meeting concluded soon after, each advisor departing with tasks. Calla lingered in her seat, watching the swirl of activity. Riker remained by the table, studying the map. She approached cautiously, clearing her throat to announce her presence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking this seriously. My father would appreciate your help." He glanced at her. "Don't mistake my actions for sentiment alone. This threat endangers my pack, too." She accepted that, though she caught a hint of reluctance in his voice. "I know," she murmured. "Still, I'm grateful." Their eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if time froze, leaving them alone amid the tension that stretched between them. She couldn't help recalling the warmth she once felt whenever he drew near, the unspoken magnetism of the mate bond. She had torn that bond apart, but faint echoes lingered in her heart. She wondered what he felt, if anything. Riker broke the silence, turning back to the map. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be significant." Understanding the dismissal, she nodded and left. As she made her way back to her room, she felt a slow burn of conflicting emotions. It was easy to blame circumstance for forcing them together, but a part of her recognized that the old bond wasn't entirely dead. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. For now, she had to focus on the immediate threat. Rescuing her parents came first. The future, whatever it held for her and Riker, would have to wait. That night, Calla lay awake, listening to the quiet hush of the lodge. Occasional footsteps in the hallway reminded her how active the pack remained, always watching for danger. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about Redwood Falls, imagining her parents trapped somewhere unknown, possibly hurt or afraid. She replayed the meeting, hearing Riker's authoritative tone, the carefully veiled concern in his eyes. She hated how her heart fluttered at those memories, as if responding to an invisible call. She got up and walked to the window. The moon, just visible through a break in the clouds, cast a gentle glow over the compound. She could see wolves moving in the courtyard, patrolling. There was an unwavering discipline that comforted her more than she cared to admit. If anyone could save Redwood Falls, it was Riker and the Bloodfang Pack. Pressing her forehead against the glass, she whispered, "Just let them be safe." She thought of her mother's laugh, her father's stern yet loving smile. "I'll do anything to bring you both back." Though she couldn't hear a reply in the silent night, a persistent determination coiled in her chest. In just a few hours, she would stand before Redwood Falls Council alongside Riker, a scenario she never imagined possible. She would have to face the town she once left behind, all while fighting a force that threatened to tear everything apart. If Redwood Falls refused to join them, more blood might be shed, and her parents' rescue would slip further away. One way or another, she would not abandon her home again. She was done running from fate, even if it meant coming to terms with the Alpha she once rejected. The morning sun broke over Bloodfang territory with a soft golden glow that contrasted sharply against the tension coiling through the lodge and its surrounding grounds. Wolves hustled from one building to another, their movements sharp with purpose as they prepared for the trip to Redwood Falls. Although Calla was used to pack life from her upbringing, she had never witnessed such a disciplined flurry of activity, and the sight reminded her that, in a few short hours, she would face Redwood Falls Council alongside Alpha Ryker Thorn. She stood near the entrance of the lodge, leaning against a sturdy wooden pillar as she waited. The courtyard lay before her, wide and open, with clusters of wolves loading gear into vehicles or speaking in subdued voices about the looming danger in the east. She wondered how her hometown would react to seeing a small convoy from Bloodfang roll up to their borders. Typically, Redwood Falls prided itself on self-reliance, wary of any hint of outside control. But if there was ever a time for Redwood Falls to set aside pride, it was now. Her thoughts were cut short when Elise walked up, still favoring the shoulder that had been scratched during the ambush. The bandage peeked out from beneath her jacket, but she moved with only a slight stiffness. "We're almost ready," Elise said, her tone brisk. "The Alpha wants a direct route. We have watchers stationed along the way to warn us if any more attackers are roaming the territory." Calla nodded, glancing around to see if Riker was in sight. "Has there been any further sign of that crossbow wielder?" she asked, recalling the terrifying moment of hearing the projectile whiz past Elise. Elise shook her head. "No direct sightings, but a scout reported footprints suggesting a small group was lurking near the roads last night. Whoever they are, they seem to vanish whenever one of our patrols closes in. We'll be ready if they show themselves again." A hushed tension settled in the air as Ryker Thorn emerged from the lodge, trailed by 2 lieutenants. He cut a striking figure in dark clothes, each step reflecting a confidence that came from years of commanding respect. His gaze flicked over the courtyard and landed on Calla, lingering just a moment before he turned to address the gathered wolves. "We move out in 5 minutes," he declared, voice carrying easily in the crisp morning air. "Vehicles stay close. Scouts, keep formation. If there's trouble, signal immediately. We won't be caught unprepared." One by one, the wolves responded with nods or murmured affirmatives. Some left to finalize supplies, while others began filing into cars or preparing to run alongside in wolf form. Calla caught the faint flicker of apprehension in a few expressions, but it was overshadowed by the discipline that Riker's leadership demanded. When Riker approached her, she dipped her head in greeting, still not entirely sure how formal she should be in his domain. He looked as if he might say something more personal, but instead he kept his voice all business. "You'll ride with me," he said. "We'll be able to coordinate as necessary, if Redwood Falls needs persuading." She swallowed the butterflies that ignited in her stomach at the prospect of spending the journey in close quarters with him. "Of course," she replied, managing to sound calm. "Whatever you think is best." He nodded curtly, then gestured for her to follow. Together, they headed to a dark SUV parked near the edge of the courtyard. An older wolf with graying hair was behind the wheel, and another pack member took the front passenger seat. Riker opened the back door for Calla, then slid in beside her. The interior smelled faintly of leather and pine, the latter likely because of the endless forest that surrounded the territory. Within minutes, the convoy rolled out, 4 vehicles in total, with an additional group of wolves running in pairs along the flanks. Calla peered out the window, watching the lodge and cabins shrink behind a cluster of tall pines. She couldn't help wondering how different Redwood Falls would seem compared to this hive of intense preparation. The few days she had already spent in Bloodfang territory had shown her an efficient, militaristic operation that Redwood Falls, for all its closeness, never truly matched. Riker's voice pulled her from her observations. "You said Redwood Falls Council respects your father above all. Who's in charge now that he's gone? Did the council name an interim beta?" She turned to him. The inside of the vehicle felt smaller than before, or perhaps it was his presence that made the space crackle with unspoken tension. "They might have asked Grayson to step up," she said after a moment's thought. "He's been part of Redwood Falls for a long time. He used to help my father plan community defenses and handle pack concerns, but Redwood Falls is so used to my father's leadership that I'm not sure if they've officially confirmed Grayson as beta or if they're just waiting for my father to return." Riker's gaze narrowed. as if calculating how that might play out. "Grayson," he repeated. "I remember him. He was quiet at negotiations in the past, but always level-headed. He might be more open to accepting help, especially if you press the urgency. If your father's documents didn't convince the rest of them, perhaps Grayson's voice will." Calla nodded. She watched the scenery change from dense forest to more open country as the SUV continued. She risked a glance at him, noticing the subtle tension in his posture. Memories of their past flitted through her mind. How she used to see glimpses of him at gatherings, the way his intense gaze could unnerve her and thrill her at the same time. Now, that intensity was honed into the shape of a leader who commanded an entire pack. She wondered if her rejection had forced him to bury whatever vulnerability once existed, forging him into an even more determined alpha. Part of her wanted to say something personal, to ask if he ever felt the bonds pull late at night, but the question tangled on her tongue. The front seat occupants were well within earshot, and even if they weren't, this was hardly the time to dredge up old emotions. She refocused on her goal, persuading Redwood Falls to accept Bloodfang's aid so they could find her parents and drive out the threat. The convoy's progress was uneventful until they reached the outskirts of Redwood Falls. The town loomed into view, smaller in scale than Bloodfang territory, its worn roads and aging buildings bearing testimony to a quieter existence. Sentries who recognized Calla's father's old SUV approached, sniffing the air to confirm the presence of strangers. Their eyes widened when they caught sight of Bloodfang's Alpha stepping out of the vehicle. Riker moved with calm authority as he addressed them. "We've come to speak with your council," he said. "We have urgent matters to discuss regarding Beta Monroe's disappearance and the threat on the borders." The sentries exchanged uneasy looks, but none refused him. Although Redwood Falls might resent outside influence, no one was foolhardy enough to bar the alpha of a powerful pack when danger lurked just beyond. They nodded and directed the convoy to park near the town hall. A few wary onlookers gathered on the sidewalks, whispering among themselves. Calla recognized some of their faces. She had grown up here, played on these streets, imagined a simpler life for herself. Now she was returning with a pack she had once rejected, led by an alpha she had personally spurned, in the hopes of saving everyone from an unknown enemy. The town hall, a modest 2-story brick building, stood at the center of Redwood Falls. Scattered trees lined the front lawn, their branches just beginning to bud with the promise of new leaves. Riker's wolves spread out, forming a loose perimeter to keep watch. Calla found herself flanked by Elise and Devon, who gave her reassuring nods as they all climbed the steps. Inside, the building's reception area was mostly empty. A tense hush radiated from the few staff who recognized Bloodfang's Alpha. One young secretary with dark hair offered to escort them, clearly intimidated by the group. She led them to a simple meeting room that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly. Within minutes, members of Redwood Falls Council arrived, alerted by the staff. Grayson was among them, his weathered face drawn tight with worry. Calla felt a wave of relief to see him, hoping he would support her plea. The other council members were older men and women, all wearing expressions that ranged from frightened to mistrustful as they faced the visitors from Bloodfang. Riker didn't wait for formalities. He stood at one end of the table with a commanding posture, while Calla, Elise, and Devon remained just behind him. "I appreciate you meeting with us," he began, voice resonating with the firm authority of an alpha. "We all know Redwood Falls is in crisis. Beta Monroe and his mate vanished without a trace, and recent events point to a coordinated hostile presence near your borders. My scouts have confirmed skirmishes with well-organized rogues, likely the same group your Beta was investigating. An uneasy stir ran through the council. Calla scanned their faces and saw flickers of recognition. They must have heard the rumors from others, or perhaps learned more details in the days since her arrival. One councilman cleared his throat, his voice wavering. We suspected something was wrong, but we have limited resources to mount a large-scale investigation. We've been organizing patrols, though the threat remains vague. Grayson looked from Riker to Calla, relief in his gaze. It's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I'm glad you brought help. He gestured for her to approach. We need any leads your father left behind. Calla stepped forward. We found a series of documents hidden in my father's study. They indicate that this threat is not simply a group of random rogues, but a well-coordinated faction possibly aiming to destabilize Redwood Falls, maybe to establish a foothold for an attack on Bloodfang. We have reason to believe my parents were taken because of what my father discovered. A woman on the council, tall and gray-haired, fidgeted with her hands. And you think we should form an official alliance with Bloodfang? Some of us remember the friction between Redwood Falls and your pack. We avoided entanglements for a reason. Our independence has always been important. Riker's expression was unreadable, but his tone carried a subtle bite when he replied, Your independence matters little if your town is overrun. The threat isn't waiting for your approval. The question is whether Redwood Falls Command wants to stand alone in the face of a superior force, or whether it wants to cooperate, so we can root out this enemy before more lives are lost. Grayson nodded in agreement, stepping to Riker's side. We can't stand by and hope the danger resolves itself, he said, voice quiet, yet resolute. I know Calla Monroe would want us to do everything possible to protect Redwood Falls. If forging a stronger alliance with Bloodfang is the only path, we must take it. A murmur spread through the council members. Calla could feel the undercurrent of fear, pride, and helplessness vying for dominance in their expressions. She stepped closer to the table, recalling how many of these individuals had watched her grow up. Please, she urged, letting her gaze move from one face to the next. I understand that Redwood Falls values its autonomy, but if my father's records are accurate, we're facing an enemy skilled in subterfuge and abduction. Nobody wants to see Redwood Falls destroyed or enslaved. I came back for my parents, but I can't save them alone. And Redwood Falls can't fight off a trained force without reinforcements. A lengthy pause followed. At last, an older councilman with white hair, who had remained mostly silent, cleared his throat. We were uneasy about the presence of Alpha Thorn for many reasons, some personal, some historical. But with the disappearance of Calla Monroe, Redwood Falls is missing its strongest leader. We need outside help now. Or we risk the entire community. Grayson turned to Riker, relief evident in his eyes. We'll do it, on the condition that Redwood Falls retains its right to self-govern on internal matters. But defense and security coordination will be under a shared command between Redwood Falls and Bloodfang. Let's call it a tactical alliance. We'll rely on your experience in rooting out this threat, while Redwood Falls provides whatever we can in terms of manpower and resources. Riker inclined his head, appearing momentarily satisfied. Agreed. We have no interest in controlling Redwood Falls' day-to-day affairs, as long as we can count on your cooperation with the bigger picture. This group may be more dangerous than we realize, and the only way to stop them is united action. The air in the room shifted, apprehension blending with a faint ripple of hope. Calla felt a flood of relief. This was the outcome she had hoped for. For the first time since her parents vanished, she sensed a real possibility that Redwood Falls might avoid utter devastation. "We should formalize this arrangement," said Grayson, gesturing to the council. "We'll draw up an agreement that the rest of Redwood Falls can understand. It might take a bit of time, but we'll make sure it's done immediately. Meanwhile, can Bloodfang begin conducting broader patrols along the eastern die?" "Border?" Riker nodded. "Yes, and we'll be assisting Redwood Falls' own patrols. I'll place a handful of watchers here, too, to provide immediate backup if your territory comes under assault. We need to close the net on these trespassers fast. My scouts have already encountered them near Redwood Falls perimeter, so time is of the essence." The council members exchanged glances, seemingly unified at last. One by one, they gave curt nods. Grayson let out a slow exhale, shoulders sagging as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Calla understood that feeling. The sense that Redwood Falls might finally have a fighting chance. Yet the question of her parents' whereabouts loomed, a constant ache that refused to subside. At least the Alliance gave them momentum toward that goal. Riker turned to Calla. "We should coordinate search parties now that Redwood Falls is officially working with us," he said in a low voice. "With access to your father's records and Redwood Falls' knowledge of the local terrain, we have a better chance of pinpointing where he might have been taken." She nodded eagerly, wanting nothing more than to find her parents. "Yes, we can begin as soon as you're ready." By mid-afternoon, Redwood Falls began stirring with the news of an alliance. Messengers circulated bulletins to inform the townspeople, and some Bloodfang wolves started patrolling main streets, meeting with Redwood Falls' own small security force to coordinate. Attention lingered. Both packs were uncertain how to navigate this sudden partnership. But fear of a common enemy overrode pride. While details were hammered out, Calla wandered toward her childhood home to gather any personal items that might be useful. Though she was relieved Redwood Falls was no longer fending for itself, she felt a sharp pang at the sight of her empty house, so quiet and lonely. If her parents returned, she'd promised herself, she would never again take them for granted. On the porch, she found Riker waiting for her. Dusk approached, painting the horizon in streaks of pink and orange, and the lamppost by the sidewalk offered a soft glow. He watched her quietly, arms crossed in a stance that radiated silent strength. She paused at the bottom step. "I didn't expect you here," she admitted. "I thought you'd be with the council." He inclined his head toward the door. "I wanted to see the place where you grew up, especially given everything that happened. Besides, Grayson is taking care of the formalities, and my wolves are securing Redwood Falls. I have a moment to spare." Her heart thumped as she stepped onto the porch, gesturing for him to follow. With a short nod, he came inside with her, and they stood in the dim foyer. She flicked on a single lamp, letting the yellowish light reveal the same worn couches, the same pictures on the walls. The atmosphere, however, felt different with him standing in the space she had once filled with teenage laughter and rebellious defiance. "This is where I spent most of my life," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she glanced at the family photos on a nearby table. One photo showed her, around age 10, sporting a goofy grin while her father offered her a congratulatory pat on the shoulder. Her mother stood to the side, bright-eyed and proud. The moment had been captured after Calla completed her first basic werewolf training session. She remembered that day like it was yesterday. Riker's gaze traveled over the photographs, lingering on her parents' faces. A softness crept into his expression, and she wondered if he felt regret for the way things had ended years ago. After a beat, he turned back to her. "They must be important to Redwood Falls, not just you," he said, voice low. "From what I've heard, your parents carried this community on their shoulders. It's no wonder Redwood Falls is adrift without them." She swallowed the pain that bloomed at the thought. "Yeah," she replied, almost whispering. My father was never the formal alpha of Redwood Falls. It's more like Redwood Falls has a rotating council, and he was one of the key voices, but he acted as beta in times of crisis, always bridging the gap when Redwood Falls needed leadership. My mother was basically the heart of this place. She organized events, helped families in trouble, mediated small disputes. They were a team, in every sense. Riker reached out, gently tracing a fingertip over the edge of a photo frame. For an instant, the quiet space felt charged with unspoken sentiments. Her mind drifted to the evening she discovered Riker was her mate. The raw surge of longing, the quiet terror of realizing her life path might be chosen for her. She'd told herself she rejected him to preserve her independence. And yes, that had been part of it. But as the years passed, she realized fear played an even bigger role. Fear of losing her identity to such a potent bond. She moved past him, heading into the living room. I came to grab a few things. Maybe a jacket, some photos, something to remind me why I'm fighting so hard to find them. Then I'll go back to Bloodfang territory and help plan the search. He nodded. I'll wait here. She slipped down the hallway. The home was familiar, yet the emptiness made it unsettling. In her parents' bedroom, she rummaged through drawers, finding a soft knitted sweater her mother used to wear on chilly evenings. She took it, pressing it to her face, the faint lingering scent threatening to bring tears. Gently, she folded it and placed it in her bag. She found a photograph of her parents from their 20th wedding anniversary, bright smiles lighting their faces, and she tucked that away as well. Leaving the bedroom, she paused at the door to her own old room, hand hovering on the handle. Summoning courage, she opened it. The space smelled vaguely of dust, but she recognized the faint trace of lavender from an old sachet hidden in her nightstand. Posters of rock bands and travel destinations still clung to the walls. The bed sat neatly made, just as she had left it when she had departed Redwood Falls. She took in the quiet hush, feeling an ache for her younger self, the girl who believed the only way to avoid destiny was to flee from it. She shook off the nostalgia, quickly collecting a few personal trinkets, a small pendant her mother gifted her, a battered novel her father loved. Each item felt like a piece of home that might anchor her through the storm. Then she returned to the living room, where Riker waited with a somber expression. Their eyes met as she placed her bag on the couch. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady even though her heart raced in her chest. "I'll keep these with me at your lodge, if that's still all right." He offered her a measured nod. "My territory is your territory, at least until we settle this. No one will question your right to stay there." She clutched the strap of the bag tighter, curiosity about his thoughts creeping in. "You never asked me why I turned my back on Redwood Falls, on you, so abruptly. Everyone else assumed it was just my rebellious nature, but I guess I always expected you to demand some explanation." A beat paused, thick with tension. He looked at her intently. "I assumed you wanted to live your life free from the responsibilities of being a Luna," he said finally, his voice quiet. "You never seemed comfortable under the scrutiny of pack traditions. When you rejected me, I thought it was just your way of saying you despised everything about being an alpha's mate." She studied his features, the flicker of old hurt flashing behind his eyes. "Maybe I thought I despised it," she murmured. "Or maybe I was afraid of losing who I was, of being folded into your shadow. You were so intense, so certain, and I was just a teenager with no sense of what I truly wanted." She cast her gaze downward. "Part of me regrets the way I did it, how harsh I was. But a bigger part of me still wonders if I needed those years away, to find myself without being labeled your mate." His silence spoke volumes. A swirl of conflicting emotions flickered across his face. "And do you feel you found yourself?" he asked, each word carefully measured. "Or are you still running?" She resisted the urge to look away. "I'm not running now," she replied, letting her voice sharpen. "I'm here, aren't I? Fighting for Redwood Falls, for my parents, for the chance to keep everyone safe." She hesitated, the next words tumbling out unbidden. "And if I'm honest, part of me is fighting for you too, because I don't want to see your territory overrun. No matter what happened, I never wanted you harmed." A flicker of emotion crossed his expression, something between surprise and guarded relief. He nodded slowly, the tension easing from his posture. Before either of them could say more, a phone buzzed in his pocket. His jaw tightened, reluctant, but he pulled out the device and answered. After a curt exchange, he hung up. "That was Grayson," Riker said. "They want you and me back at the town hall. They found something near the eastern forest line. A possible clue about your parents." Calla's heart jolted. Grabbing her bag, she moved toward the door, the weight of worry descending anew. "Then, let's go," she said, voice resolute. Riker simply nodded. They left the house behind, stepping into the twilight that blanketed Redwood Falls. As they climbed into the waiting SUV, Calla's mind churned with hope and dread in equal measure. She could only pray that this new lead would bring her one step closer to finding her parents alive. Whatever confusion she felt about Riker, about her past choices, she shoved aside for the moment. Life and death stakes overshadowed old heartbreak, forging her determination to see this through until the end. The eastern edge of Redwood Falls, known locally as Silver Creek, had always been less populated, mostly woodland dotted with a few abandoned cabins. A small group of Redwood Falls scouts had gathered there, waiting near a clearing where the grass grew tall and the trees pressed close. The night air felt electrified, an undercurrent of tension humming in every breath. A hush settled over the group as Calla and Riker arrived, accompanied by Elise and a handful of Bloodfang wolves. One of the scouts, a lean woman wearing a weathered jacket, approached, carrying a slip of paper. "This was tied to a tree," she explained, handing it to Riker. "We think it's meant to be a message. Or a warning." Riker glanced at Calla before reading it aloud under the glow of a flashlight. "Leave us your territory. We have the beta and his mate. Redwood Falls will be ours, or there will be blood. Resist, and you will lose them forever." The words felt like a punch to the stomach. Calla's vision swam momentarily as she processed the threat against her parents. The abruptness of it made all the more chilling by the nighttime silence. She clenched her hands into fists at her sides, a flicker of anger rising to quench the cold fear. "They're using my parents as hostages," she said, her voice tight. "That confirms they're alive, at least. But Redwood Falls is the ransom they want." Riker's growl was low, barely audible. "They're underestimating the alliance that's forming between Redwood Falls and Bloodfang," he said, gaze sweeping across the dark tree line. "They're trying to intimidate Redwood Falls into surrender. We won't let that happen." A second scout, a man with a short beard, shook his head. "We tried to follow footprints leading away from the tree, but they seemed to vanish into the creek. Hard to track in water. We suspect they're holed up somewhere deeper in the forest, maybe a cave or an old bunker. They know the terrain well." Elise angled her flashlight toward the creek's direction. "So they left a message in plain sight, then disappeared. They want Redwood Falls to be shaken by this. A fearful pack is easier to conquer." Calla suppressed a shiver. She kept imagining her parents tied up in some cramped hideaway, possibly guarded by roving wolves under the command of a faceless leader. The same question echoed in her mind. How do we find them before it's too late? She turned to Riker. We can't just wait around. We should track them at first light, or set up a night patrol. Anything to get closer. Riker handed the note back to the scout, expression resolute. Have Redwood Falls keep watch on this area. Bloodfang will send in advance trackers to see if we can pick up a trail. We'll also need Redwood Falls to finalize the alliance quickly, so we can move troops without confusion. Whoa. Grayson, who arrived moments later, overheard and stepped forward. Under the flashlight's beam, the lines of worry on his face looked deeper. We're tightening the trolls around Redwood Falls, but if they're hiding in the forest, that's a lot of ground to cover. Riker nodded. Bloodfang's trackers will narrow it down. In the meantime, can Redwood Falls muster any volunteers who know the terrain? We'll coordinate with them. Every hour counts, Grayson agreed, beginning a hurried conversation with the scouts about a joint effort. Calla stood silently beside Riker, her mind racing with a mix of dread and fierce determination. The threat was real, and the enemy seemed to have no qualms about extortion or brutality. But at least her parents were alive, or so the note implied. That spark of hope bolstered her resolve. When Grayson finished with the scouts, he turned back. We should gather Redwood Falls' best trackers by dawn. Between them and your wolves, we might have a chance at a careful search. This faction can't hide forever. Elise tapped her chin thoughtfully. I'll inform our Alpha's top trackers. We'll begin from Redwood Falls at first light, systematically combing the eastern forest. If we find anything, we'll call for reinforcements. Riker's eyes flicked to Calla, who stared at the dark line of trees. You'll stay in Redwood Falls tonight, he said gently, but with a tone that suggested he wouldn't tolerate an argument. I need you to rest, because tomorrow will be intense. Plus, if Redwood Falls needs someone to encourage them to stand firm, you're the best voice to remind them what's at stake. Calla swallowed, glancing at the silhouettes of Redwood Falls scouts in the moonlight. She wanted to argue that she should be part of every search detail, but she also understood the logic. If Redwood Falls panicked, her presence might keep them grounded. All right, she relented, though frustration simmered in her chest. But promise me you'll share any new information immediately. I will, Riker said, his voice softening a fraction. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we strike back. She nodded, stepping aside as he conferred quietly with Elise and Grayson about logistics. Her thoughts churned with images of the newly discovered threat, the demands scrawled on that note. Fear pulsed in her veins at the mention of there will be blood, but she clung to the flicker of hope that her parents were still breathing somewhere beyond those trees. She refused to let the enemy's intimidation break her will. Redwood Falls and Bloodfang were uniting, and with that alliance, there was a fighting chance. As she walked back toward the main street of Redwood Falls, accompanied by one of the local scouts, she couldn't help looking over her shoulder at the forest's edge. A low wind stirred the branches, and the moonlight revealed only swaying shadows and flickers of light where flashlights roved. In that moment, Calla silently vowed that no matter how dangerous the path ahead, she would do whatever it took to rescue her parents. And if it meant she had to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Alpha she once rejected, so be it. Fear wouldn't stop her, not this time. Dawn arrived in a wash of pale gold across Redwood Falls, illuminating the weary faces of wolves and humans who had slept little and worried much. The final negotiations for the alliance were completed overnight, leaving Redwood Falls and Bloodfang officially bound to a shared cause: rescue Beta Monroe and his mate, and rid the eastern forests of the dangerous Crow faction. It was an uneasy partnership, forged by necessity, but it had already changed the atmosphere in town. Where suspicion once prevailed, a mix of trepidation and guarded hope now took root. Calla was up before the sun, pacing restlessly inside the small inn where Redwood Falls offered lodging to visiting allies. She sipped a steaming mug of tea, trying to settle her nerves, and stared at the empty street through the window. Thoughts of her parents beset her, along with flashes of her conversation with Riker. She remembered the quiet intensity in his eyes as he acknowledged that her fear once drove her away, and she wondered if this crisis would force them to confront not only the external threat, but also the tangled emotions that Calla lingered between them. By the time she stepped outside, Redwood Falls Main Street had come alive with purposeful movement. Locals were gathering along with Bloodfang wolves, forming squads destined for the eastern forest. A few Redwood Falls trackers stood with backpacks and gear, conferring with Elise and Devon, who had arrived from Bloodfang territory in the early hours. Riker himself stood near one of the vehicles, issuing instructions to a cluster of wolves who appeared to be advanced scouts. She made her way toward him, carefully weaving through the crowd. The energy was tense, yet it carried an undercurrent of resolve. She greeted a few Redwood Falls neighbors, some of whom offered hushed encouragement. Others looked concerned, as if worried that this combined force might still be no match for an enemy adept at stealth and intimidation. Riker, dressed in a worn leather jacket and sturdy boots, nodded at her approach. "We're finalizing search teams," he told her. "I've split the territory into sections, and Redwood Falls volunteers will pair with Bloodfang wolves. You'll join me in the main group. We'll start along Silver Creek, then move east. The other teams will sweep in from the north and south, trying to box them in." Calla nodded, her anxiety spiking. "I want to help as much as possible. I won't slow anyone down, I promise. But if I need to do something else, like encourage Redwood Falls or gather local knowledge, just tell me." His gaze was intense, and she sensed he was torn between protecting her and letting her do whatever was necessary to find her parents. "I'll keep you close," he said simply. "If my trackers pick up a definite trail, we'll follow, but I won't let you wander into a skirmish. Your parents can't be saved if we lose you too." A flicker of warmth threaded through her chest at the protective undertone, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the immediate goal. "Thank you," she murmured. "Let's find them." He dipped his head in acknowledgement, then raised his voice to address the gathering squad. "We move out now. Remember, we're dealing with a group that excels in stealth. Don't underestimate them. Keep radios on, watch each other's backs, and the moment you see something suspicious, signal. We're not out here to chase ghosts, we're out here to corner them." A ripple of agreement moved through the assembled wolves and Redwood Falls trackers. Calla found her hands trembling faintly from adrenaline, but she steadied herself, reminding her racing heart that this was the best chance she had to save her family. Elise and Devon joined her, each sporting dark clothing and small backpacks. With Werewolf, a senior Redwood Falls tracker, they formed the core search party under Riker's leadership. The vehicles rolled out in a small convoy, but after only a few miles, they parked near an old logging road that led into denser forest. From there, the squads continued on foot or in wolf form. Calla and Riker walked side by side, while Elise and Devon shifted into wolves to scout ahead. Redwood Falls trackers, including Grey Wolf, spread out behind them, carefully stepping through undergrowth. The air smelled of damp pine needles and moss. The sun filtered through the canopy, casting shifting patterns of light on the forest floor. They proceeded slowly, scanning for footprints, broken branches, or any sign of hidden camps. Calla kept her eyes peeled, heart pounding with anticipation. Though the forest seemed tranquil, she remembered too well how easily assailants could appear out of nowhere. That recollection from the ambush sent prickles of alarm through her limbs. After about an hour of careful progress, Elise returned in wolf form, ears alert. She let out a low whine and led them to a faint indentation in the soft ground. The group gathered as Elise pointed her muzzle toward a set of tracks, a half-dozen footprints crossing an area of wet soil near a small stream. Some tracks appeared older, others more recent, all heading deeper into the east. Devon shifted back to human form, examining the footprints closely. "A mix of boot prints and paw prints," he murmured. "Looks like a party of wolves moving with a couple of humans or shifters wearing boots. Hard to say exactly how many. It could be 5 or 6, maybe more." Greywolf crouched, running his fingers through the moist dirt. "They're heading for higher ground. If there's a cave or old shack up there, that might be their hideout. This area used to be popular with loggers. There are abandoned cabins further east." Calla's pulse quickened. If they're using an old cabin, that might explain how they're staying hidden. Redwood Falls rarely patrols out here. Riker took in the surroundings, scanning the thick trunks and the narrow game trail that vanished into brambles. "We'll keep following these prints. If they vanish again, we'll split into smaller groups to find the next sign. Elise, Devon, shift and flank us. Calla, stay close to me. Greywolf, guide us if you recall the layout of Crite. Those cabins." With that plan settled, they moved on. The slope grew steeper, forcing them to pick their way carefully over roots and rocks. Patches of brush snagged at their clothing, and occasionally, low branches slapped across their shoulders. The entire time, Calla felt that unseen eyes might be lurking beyond each bend in the trail. After another half-mile, Greywolf signaled to pause. He pointed through a gap in the trees at a structure in the distance. A small, run-down cabin perched near the edge of a rocky rise. A faint wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, dissipating quickly in the breeze. Riker narrowed his eyes at the sight. "That's not normal for an abandoned cabin." He glanced at Elise and Devon, both in wolf form, crouched and ready. "Elise, circle around from the west. Devon, from the east. Check for guards. The rest of us will approach quietly from the front. If we confirm hostiles inside, we'll surround them before they can escape." Adrenaline flooded Calla's veins as they crept closer, using the thick pines for cover. Her ears strained for any sound that might warn of an ambush. The rustle of leaves and the call of distant birds grated on her nerves. She could see the cabin more clearly now, a sagging roof, broken windows patched with old boards, and a makeshift fence built from mismatched planks. Smoke still trailed from the chimney, indicating someone was inside. Riker's expression was grim, his wolf instincts clearly on high alert. Greywolf took the lead, setting each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs. Calla followed, heart thundering. She clutched her radio, ready to warn the others if anything happened. At about 30 yards away, Greywolf motioned for them to halt behind a large fallen tree trunk. He lifted binoculars, surveying the cabin. Riker did the same. A tense silence followed. Then, softly, Riker muttered, "I see movement by the window. Armed. They look like they're expecting trouble." Calla felt a jolt in her chest. "If they have my parents in there," she swallowed. "Could they be keeping them locked up somewhere inside?" she whispered. "We'll find out," Riker answered, scanning for Elise or Devon. Through gaps in the underbrush, Calla spotted the silhouettes of 2 wolves slinking around the cabin's perimeter, confirming there were no hidden sentries in the woods. Satisfied, Riker motioned for the rest of their group to advance. The final approach was nerve-wracking. At any moment, the watchers in the cabin could spot them and open fire. Yet no alarm was raised as they closed the distance. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Eventually, they reached a cluster of scraggly bushes just a few feet from the sagging fence. Calla pressed herself against the rough bark of a pine, peering around the side to see if anyone stepped into view. Her stomach churned with tension. Riker signaled silently, pointing to the front door while Grey Wolf took aim at a window. Elise and Devon emerged from behind a stack of firewood near the rear of the cabin, fangs bared. Everything hinged on a careful, coordinated assault. If anyone was inside with crossbows or guns, it could erupt into bloodshed instantly. Riker lifted 3 fingers, counting down. Calla braced herself, heart hammering. On 0, Riker and Grey Wolf surged forward. Riker's powerful kick battered the cabin door open, splintering the rotted wood with a loud crack. A startled shout came from inside, followed by the thump of frantic footsteps. Grey Wolf fired a warning shot into the ceiling, a bullet that slammed into the beams with a shower of dust. "Drop your weapons!" Riker roared, his command tone laced with alpha authority. Elise and Devon leaped in from the rear, snarling. Calla hung back, peering into the open doorway, straining to see or hear any trace of her parents. The interior was dim, cluttered with old chairs, overturned crates, and threadbare rugs. Shadows moved across the walls as the intruders inside dove for cover. Suddenly, a shape darted toward the side window, brandishing a crossbow. The figure was lean, with unkempt hair and eyes that burned with defiance. He fired a bolt wildly at Grey Wolf, who ducked, the projectile lodging in a wooden beam. Riker lunged with preternatural speed, delivering a punch that knocked the weapon from the man's hands, sending him sprawling across the floor. Another attacker rushed from a side room, brandishing a knife, but Elise in wolf form tackled him, teeth snapping dangerously close to his wrist. The man cried out, dropping the blade. Calla edged closer, stepping over the broken doorframe into the cabin. Gunpowder and sweat filled her nostrils, making her stomach tighten. 2 more rogues cowered in a corner, pinned by Devon's menacing growl. The entire cabin shook with the aftermath of the sudden incursion, dust motes swirling in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the walls. Riker scanned the area, chest heaving with adrenaline. "Where are the hostages?" he barked, voice echoing off the battered walls. One of the cornered rogues, face pale and eyes darting, tried to stammer a denial. "We don't have them. We never had them," he insisted, trembling. Grey Wolf aimed his rifle. "We found your note threatening Redwood Falls if it didn't surrender. We know you took Beta Monroe and his mate." The rogue shook his head frantically. "Look, I never said that. We're just following orders from higher up. We don't have them here." He swallowed hard. "They were moved days ago. We don't know where. We're just a scouting team." "I swear!" A low growl rattled in Riker's throat. "Who commands you? Where are they keeping the hostages?" Elise snapped her jaws near the pinned man's face, a warning. He whimpered, glancing at the second captive, as if unsure what to say. Eventually, he spoke in a quavering voice. We get instructions from a messenger. He calls himself Cassian. He told us to harass Redwood Falls, drive them into panic. The hostages are somewhere deeper east." "That's all I know." Calla's heart butted, dread mingling with anger. She stepped forward, voice shaky but firm. "So, it was a trick? You left that note to terrorize Redwood Falls, but they're not even here? You're telling me you separated my parents, took them somewhere else entirely?" The rogue's gaze flickered between her and Riker. We don't know anything else. Cassian only said to threaten Redwood Falls and keep the Bloodfang Pack busy. He said they wanted Redwood Falls for strategic reasons. Please, we're just following orders. Devon snarled, baring sharp teeth. Your so-called orders have endangered innocent people. You're lucky we're not finishing this now. Riker silenced Devon with a gesture, though his own fury was palpable in the tightness of his jaw. Tie them up. We'll bring them back to Redwood Falls for questioning. Someone must know where Beta Monroe was taken. He turned to Calla, frustration clear in his expression. They lied in that note, or at least misled us. Your parents aren't here. This was just one cell of a bigger network. The realization settled over Calla, heavy and suffocating. This changes everything. My parents could be anywhere. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, fighting tears. They had pinned so much hope on finding her parents stashed in some corner of this forest. Instead, they only discovered more pawns in a larger plot. Elise and Greywolf bound the captive's wrists with rope. The battered men offered no resistance now, cowed by the Alpha's lethal aura and the snarling wolves in the room. Calla spotted meager supplies scattered around, canned food, torn blankets, a map pinned to a wall with cryptic markings. She hurried over to examine it, searching for any clue. The map depicted Redwood Falls, Bloodfang territory, and swaths of forest. A few circles were drawn in red, accompanied by symbols she didn't immediately recognize. She traced her finger across the lines, heart pounding. "Riker," she called, beckoning him to look. "These must be the locations where they planned attacks or scouting missions. See, Redwood Falls is circled here, Bloodfang territory is marked here, and there's another circle way out east near the old mine. Is that maybe a main camp?" Riker stepped closer, his body radiating tension. "It could be," he said. "We've had rumors about increased rogue activity around that abandoned mine, but it's treacherous terrain. Flooded tunnels, collapsed shafts, easy to get lost. Perfect for a secret hideout." Devon loomed behind them, eyes narrowed. "We should confirm. Let me interrogate these scum about the mine." Calla nodded, hoping the captives would yield more details if pressed. Riker, however, gestured for Devon to step aside. "We'll bring them in. Redwood Falls might want a say in how they're questioned. We need to maintain a united front, especially if we intend to take bigger action." Anger pulsed in Calla's veins, and she tore her gaze from the map to face the nearest captive. "If you know anything at all, about that mine or about Cassian's plans, tell us now. My parents' lives depend on it." The man swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the map. "We only heard whispers about a major outpost. Cassian said something about an underground network, old tunnels turned into strongholds. That's all I know, I swear." A wave of frustration engulfed her, though she tried to cling to the single shred of hope that the old mine might be a lead. She wanted to demand more, to claw for every scrap of intel, but the man genuinely looked at a loss. Stepping back, she nodded at Elise, who tied a gag around his mouth to silence any last-minute protest. Riker placed a hand gently on Calla's shoulder, a gesture that sent a shock of warmth through her despite the grim circumstances. "We'll take them back," he said, voice softer. "We'll search the mine. We'll find your parents." She drew a shaky breath. "We have to, no matter how dangerous it is." Gathering the rogues, the group left the cabin behind, the midday sun filtering through the forest canopy as they trekked back toward Redwood Falls. The successful capture of these lackeys was overshadowed by the sobering knowledge that they remained far from rescuing Beta Monroe and his mate. Each step felt weighted with an urgent need to uncover the larger faction's secrets before Redwood Falls faced an even greater assault. The next several hours blurred into a haze of debriefings and tense speculation in Redwood Falls. The captured rogues were handed over to the combined authority of Redwood Falls and Bloodfang, locked in a secure room within the town hall. A small team, including Riker and Grayson, attempted to extract further information, while others pored over the confiscated map. The red-circled area near the old mine became their prime suspect. By evening, the leaders agreed on the next step: a full-scale expedition to the abandoned mine. The mine, built decades ago, had been left to decay after the local industry failed. Rumors abounded of hidden shafts and labyrinthine tunnels that remained unexplored. If the faction had made it a base, they would be dug in with potential booby traps, lookouts, and the strategic advantage of knowing the dark corridors. Yet Redwood Falls and Bloodfang had no choice but to attempt it. Time was running out, and the note implied an impending showdown. In the late evening, Calla found herself in the same town hall meeting room as before, now thrumming with activity. Maps of the old mine lay spread across the long table, although they were incomplete and out of date. Riker stood at one end, conferring quietly with Elise and Devon about tactical formations. Grayson, arms folded, talked in low tones with Redwood Falls trackers about how best to approach the mountainous terrain. Tension weighed on every face. Calla hovered near the corner, exhausted from the day's events, but unwilling to rest until the plan was finalized. Her bag with her parents' sweater and photographs lay in a chair nearby, a silent reminder of why she had come so far. She noticed Riker's gaze shift toward her occasionally, and while she sensed his concern, neither of them had time for personal conversation amidst the flurry of planning. Finally, the strategy took shape. At dawn, a combined force of Redwood Falls and Bloodfang, numbering around 30 fighters and scouts, would travel to the base of the mountain where the mine was located. They would split into smaller groups to surround the area, searching for vent shafts or secondary entrances that might be used as escape routes. The main group would enter the primary shaft, led by Riker, and attempt to secure each tunnel systematically. After final confirmations, Riker wrapped up the meeting with a stern warning to both Redwood Falls and Bloodfang participants. "We can't underestimate these people. They've proven clever and ruthless, so we'll move carefully. Priority 1 is rescuing Beta Monroe and his mate. Priority 2 is shutting down this operation before it cropper. Spreads! Everyone, be ready by sunrise." A weary murmur of agreement spread around the table as the group dispersed. Some left to collect gear, others to snatch a few hours of sleep. Calla hung back, gathering her bag. She still felt that compulsion to do more, to find some missing piece of intelligence that would guarantee success, but she realized she was at the limit of her knowledge. All she could do now was prepare. As she exited the building, a cool night breeze ruffled her hair, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant wood smoke. The stars overhead seemed brighter than usual, as if they were bearing silent witness to Redwood Falls' tribulations. She exhaled shakily, wishing she could see some sign that her parents were okay. A warm hand on her arm made her jump. She turned to find Riker standing close, his features softened by concern. "I wanted to check on you before tomorrow," he said, voice subdued. "It's going to be dangerous. Maybe more dangerous than anything you've seen before." She lifted her chin, trying to project a resolve she wasn't entirely sure she felt. "I can handle it," she replied. "I need to be there. My parents." He hushed her gently. "I understand. I just want you to know you don't have to fight in the front lines. There's a risk that, if the tunnels collapse or if a firefight breaks out, you could be badly hurt." Anger flared momentarily, though she realized it stemmed from her own fear. "They're my parents," she said again, more quietly. Even if I'm not swinging claws or shooting, I want to be there to see them safe, or to do whatever it takes if there's a moment to help. Don't shut me out." His eyes flickered with conflict, as though he fought between the instinct to protect her and the understanding of her claim. Eventually, he nodded. "All right. Stay behind the main fighters, and if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed?" Her pulse thundered at the intimacy of his words. He had never spoken so gently in front of Redwood Falls. She managed a small nod, her throat tight. "Agreed." They lingered for a moment under the starlight, the old bond between them stirring uncomfortably, reminding her of how different this moment was from the day she rejected him. She felt the bruise of regret and the raw edge of longing, but she also recognized that the immediate crisis demanded all their focus. Tomorrow could bring victory or devastation. There was no way to predict the outcome in a fight against a cunning enemy hidden in labyrinthine tunnels. After an uncomfortable silence, Riker murmured, "Get some rest, Calla. Tomorrow, we change the fate of Redwood Falls and Bloodfang." He stepped back, turning as if to leave. Impulsively, she reached out, fingers brushing his hand. He paused, glancing at her in question. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. No matter what happens, I'm grateful you're here." He squeezed her hand briefly, then let go, an indefinable emotion in his eyes. "Sleep well," he said, and then he was gone, striding into the night with the purposeful gait of an alpha, bearing the weight of 2 packs on his shoulders. Dawn was just a faint glimmer on the horizon when the expedition set off toward the old mine. Vehicles carried most of the fighters partway up the rough mountain roads, until the terrain became too steep for wheeled travel. From there, they traveled on foot, nearly 30 wolves and humans spread out in small units. A hush cloaked the mountainside, broken only by the scrape of boots on rock and the occasional rustle of brush. The air smelled of damp earth and the metallic tang of old ore deposits. Calla stuck close to Riker, Elise, and Devon. Greywolf and 3 Redwood Falls trackers joined their group, providing local knowledge of the rocky pathways. Other squads flanked them on either side, ready to converge if trouble arose. The plan was to reach the mine's entrance and secure it before the enemy realized the size of their force. Meanwhile, watchers peeled off to search for vent shafts or hidden tunnels used as escape routes. At last, the main entrance of the abandoned mine loomed into view. A gaping black hole carved into the mountainside, partially reinforced by crumbling wooden beams. Rusty tracks for old ore carts led inside, disappearing into the gloom. It was eerily quiet, the wind whistling past jagged rocks. A sign, battered by decades of exposure, warned trespassers to keep out. Beyond that, a rusted chain-link fence stood partially collapsed, offering no real barrier. Riker ordered a halt, scanning the entrance. A few footprints marred the dirt around the opening, suggesting recent activity. He lifted a hand, motioning for 2 of his best scouts to check the interior. They advanced, flashlights slicing through the darkness. Moments later, they returned, gestures indicating no immediate guards in the first chamber. Tension mounted as Riker turned to the assembled fighters, voice low. "We move in carefully. The mine has multiple tunnels branching off. Elise, you take a squad down the right passage. Devon, you take another group down the left. Calla, Greywolf, and I will move straight through the central tunnel. Stay in radio contact. If you find hostages, or if you're pinned down, call for backup. Our goal is to find Beta Monroe and his mate. Let's hope we're in time." He spared Calla a sidelong glance, that she interpreted as both warning and reassurance. Then, flashlights and torches at the ready, they entered the yawning mouth of the mine. The atmosphere changed instantly, cold air rushing over them, thick with the scent of damp stone and rusted metal. Dripping water echoed, creating a steady, haunting rhythm. Wooden support beams creaked ominously, adding to the claustrophobic dread. The group advanced, boots crunching on loose gravel and old rails. Shafts of light from flashlights revealed broken crates, decaying tools, and graffiti scrawled on the stone walls. Occasionally, they came across a side passage that branched off into darkness. Most were collapsed or blocked by rubble. They checked each quickly, but the deeper they went, the more labyrinthine the corridors became. Calla's heart hammered. She kept scanning for any sign of her parents, discarded belongings, or a glimpse of captive forms. Greywolf muttered updates into the radio, hearing similarly cautious progress from Elise and Devon in the adjoining tunnels. So far, no sign of the enemy. It was unsettling, as if they'd stumbled into a ghost mine, yet they knew the faction thrived in secrecy. Suddenly, from far ahead, a faint flicker of orange light danced on the tunnel walls, as if from a hidden torch or lantern. Riker motioned for everyone to kill their flashlights. In darkness, they crept forward, letting their eyes adjust. The mine was almost pitch black, save for the flicker of that distant glow. They eased around a bend, and Calla's heart lurched at what they found. An open cavern, lit by a few torches mounted on old beams. Crates were stacked near the walls, and several bedrolls lay scattered on the ground. But more importantly, a row of cages lined one side of the cavern, fashioned from metal bars that appeared relatively new. Inside two of the cages, slumped figures were barely visible in the torchlight. Calla's stomach clenched. Could that be her parents? She yearned to rush forward, but Riker held out an arm to keep her still. There were guards, at least 4 she could see, lurking near the crates, all armed with guns or crossbows. The distance was a good 20 yards of open ground, giving the guards a clear line of fire on anyone who approached recklessly. Riker's voice was a barely audible whisper. "We'll have to coordinate. Greywolf, contact the others, tell them we found an encampment. Let's see if we can draw the guards' attention so we can free whoever's in those cages." Calla's breath trembled. She squinted at the cage, trying to make out the prisoners. A flash of recognition jolted her. The figure slumped in the nearest cage had shoulder-length hair, a color reminiscent of her mother's. She stifled a gasp, tears threatening to burn her eyes. That had to be them, her parents. She forced herself to remain calm, gripping the handle of her flashlight so tightly her knuckles hurt. "They're alive. I can't lose my head now." Greywolf whispered hurried instructions into the radio, then nodded to Riker. The Alpha turned to Calla, gaze intense. "Stay right behind me," he murmured. "We'll approach from the left, using those crates for cover. Once we engage, we'll push them away from the cages. You go for your parents, see if they can move on their own." She nodded, jaw set in determination. Her pulse pounded with adrenaline, and her entire body felt taut as a bowstring. Riker signaled the rest of their group to fan out. They crouched low, footsteps muffled by the soft dirt floor. As soon as they neared the cluster of crates, a startled shout broke the silence. One of the guards had spotted them. Everything happened in a blur. Gunshots and crossbow bolts whizzed through the cavern, the reports echoing off the stone. Riker lunged, eyes flashing with alpha ferocity, while Greywolf fired at a guard who tried to line up a shot. Sparks flew when bullets ricocheted off metal rails or rock. Calla pressed herself behind a crate, heart hammering in terror, but with a fierce resolve fueling her next move. A guard to the right drew a bead on her, so she dropped flat, letting the bullet splinter wood overhead. Riker roared, shifting partially into his wolf form, claws and fangs bared as he hurled himself into the guard, sending the man crashing into a beam. More shots rang out from behind. Elise's contingent must have arrived, attacking from the rear. Seizing the moment, Calla darted toward the cages. Another guard swiveled to fire on her, but a Redwood Falls tracker tackled him, knocking him off balance. She reached the bars, breath coming in ragged gasps, eyes searching the dim interior. Her mother lay crumpled on the floor of one cage, her father in the cage beside her, both looking weak and malnourished. At the sight of them, a sob caught in Calla's throat. "Mom! Dad!" she cried softly, hands fumbling for the cage latch. It was secured with a hefty lock. She spotted a ring of keys on a hook near the corner. Adrenaline surging, she grabbed them, trying several in quick succession until she heard the satisfying click. She yanked open the door. Her mother stirred, eyes fluttering open with a faint moan. Relieved tears blurred Calla's vision. "Mom, I'm here," she whispered, helping her mother sit up. "We're getting you out." Her father, in the next cage, groaned in pain. He had bruises on his face, a gash matted with dried blood near his temple. She forced calm, trying to keep her hands steady as she unlocked his cage too. Gunfire still rattled behind her, though it was diminishing, replaced by the growls and snarls of wolves subduing the last of the guards. Carefully, she eased her mother's arm around her shoulder, noticing how frail she felt. Her mother opened her lips, voice barely audible. "Calla, my sweet girl, you shouldn't have come." Tears brimmed in Calla's eyes, but she mustered a shaky smile. "I had to. Let's get you both out of here." She turned to her father, who managed to stand by leaning on the bars. His eyes were glazed with exhaustion, yet upon seeing her, a flicker of relief crossed his face. She supported him with her other arm, struggling to balance both parents. Suddenly, a furious snarl tore through the air. She whipped around to see a tall figure stepping from a side tunnel, brandishing a gleaming blade. He wore a dark hood and had an imposing presence that radiated menace. With swift, almost inhuman speed, he lunged toward Calla and her parents. She had no chance to defend herself, burdened as she was. Before the blade could strike, Riker was there, intercepting with a roar. He grappled the attacker's arm, the knife scraping across the Alpha's jacket instead of sinking into Calla. The attacker's hood fell, revealing a scarred face twisted with rage. This had to be someone of higher rank than the guards, possibly the leader of this cell. His eyes glowed with a cunning malevolence that sent a chill down Calla's spine. The two clashed in a flurry of blows, steel glinting under torchlight. Riker fought with lethal precision, partially shifted, nails elongated, fangs bared. Yet the scarred man was no amateur. He twisted free of Riker's grip, slashing across Riker's forearm, drawing a snarl of pain. Blood spattered on the dirt. Calla's heart seized in terror, but Riker barely flinched, pressing the attack with renewed ferocity. Fearing for Riker's safety, Calla scrambled backward with her parents, trying to put distance between them and the lethal struggle. She noticed Elise, in wolf form, creeping around from behind. In one swift leap, Elise launched herself at the scarred man, fangs sinking into his shoulder. He screamed, dropping the blade. Riker took advantage, delivering a powerful blow that sent the man crashing against the cavern wall. His body slumped, unconscious, or near it. Panting, Riker steadied himself, shaking off the sting of his wounded arm. Elise yanked back, muzzle stained with the attacker's blood. The cavern fell silent, save for the soft whimpers of the remaining guards who lay subdued, and the ragged breathing of the rescued captives. Shaken to her core, Calla managed to guide her parents away from the cages. Redwood Falls trackers hurried to help, their expressions relieved upon recognizing Beta Monroe. One offered a water skin, and Calla's mother sipped gratefully, though she winced at every movement. Her father locked eyes with Riker, voice hoarse. You saved us." Riker dipped his head, glancing at Calla. "It was a team effort. Redwood Falls and Bloodfang stand together now." Calla's father mustered a pained smile. "Guess you two finally found a way to work together," he said, his tone laced with a mixture of gratitude and subdued amusement despite his weakness. She flushed, grateful he was coherent enough to speak. The tension and danger remained, though, because the rest of the mine had to be cleared. Voices echoed from side tunnels as squads regrouped, reporting success in driving out or capturing the faction's fighters. A Redwood Falls medic rushed in, kneeling beside her parents. She let them take over, heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the near-fatal encounter. Riker came to her side, his wounded arm pressed against his torso. Blood seeped through a tear in his sleeve, though he tried to act as if it was nothing. "Are they all right?" he asked, voice tight with concern. She nodded, eyes shining with tears. "They're alive, thanks to you." She glanced at his wound, worry blooming. "That looks bad. You need to let someone bandage it." He inhaled sharply, nodding. "In a moment. Let me just ensure this cell's leader can't hurt anyone else." Elise, shifting back to human form and wiping blood from her mouth, stood over the unconscious scarred man. "He's breathing. We should take him in for questioning. We still don't know how widespread this organization is, or who Cassian is." Riker agreed. "Greywolf, help me secure him. We'll bring him to Redwood Falls along with the others. The rest of you, gather any documents or supplies. Let's see if we can figure out the extent of this operation." While the others moved to comply, Calla knelt beside her mother, who managed to grip her hand weakly. "You did good, baby girl," her mother whispered, tears filling her own eyes. "Thank you for coming back for us." Emotion choked Calla's throat, and she carefully brushed a damp lock of hair from her mother's forehead. "Rest now, Mom. We'll get you and Dad out of here. You're safe." Her father coughed, leaning into the medic's support. "Safe, but Redwood Falls. How bad is it?" he rasped. Calla squeezed his hand. "The town's forming an alliance with Bloodfang. We're stronger together now. It'll be all right." Relief flooded his features, and he closed his eyes, too weak for further conversation. The medic checked their vitals, nodding that they would need rest and better medical care soon, but they would survive. Calla felt her heart lighten, tears slipping down her cheeks. After so many days of fear and uncertainty, the sight of her parents, battered but alive, felt like a gift she would never take for granted again. It took hours to secure the mine, treat the wounded, and haul out the captives. By midday, Redwood Falls and Bloodfang squads emerged triumphant from the mountain tunnels, guiding the rescued hostages, including Beta Monroe and his mate, to waiting vehicles. Morale soared as word spread that the mission was a success. One critical cell of the rogue faction dismantled, the prisoners and documents sure to provide further leads on Cassian and the broader organization. Calla insisted on riding with her parents in a makeshift ambulance Redwood Falls prepared. The entire journey down the mountain, she stayed at their side, soothing them whenever they stirred. Riker and his wolves followed close behind, ensuring no hidden remnants of the enemy would launch a counterattack. When they reached Redwood Falls, the townspeople lined the streets, relief and joy shining in their faces at the sight of Beta Monroe alive. The council members rushed to help carry him and his mate to the local clinic. It was a chaotic scene. Medical staff barking orders, family friends weeping tears of relief. Calla stayed out of the way, letting the professionals do their work, but she never strayed far from the door, unwilling to be separated again. Greywolf came by, patting her shoulder. "They're tough," he assured her. "They'll recover. Thank you for bringing Bloodfang to Redwood Falls." It was the right choice. She nodded, exhaustion settling into her bones now that the immediate crisis had passed. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, the clinic staff confirmed that her parents were stable. They needed time to regain their strength, but their injuries weren't fatal. Calla's sense of relief was almost overwhelming. Late that evening, she stepped outside the clinic, blinking away tears. The night air felt gentle against her skin. Down the street, she spotted Riker talking quietly with Elise and Devon. He had changed into a fresh shirt, though a clean bandage showed through a gap in the sleeve, evidence of the knife wound he sustained. Even from a distance, she could see the weariness in his posture. This had taken a toll on him, too. Her feet carried her toward him almost unconsciously. Elise, noticing her approach, gave Riker a slight nod and excused herself with Devon. They disappeared around a corner, leaving Calla and Riker standing in the amber glow of a street lamp. "How are they?" he asked softly, noting the tears clinging to her lashes. "They'll be okay," she replied, a shaky smile forming. "The doctor says they just need rest and proper care." "Thank you for keeping your promise, for helping me find them." He exhaled, shoulders easing. "I'm relieved, and Redwood Falls is relieved. Your father is a cornerstone of this place. The people needed him back." A beat of silence passed. She gazed at him, recalling how he bled for Redwood Falls, risking his life in that claustrophobic tunnel, even though Redwood Falls had been so distant from his pack before. Memories of her rejection flickered through her mind, fueling a fresh wave of guilt for the pain she had caused him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "For running away, for turning my back on you. I convinced myself it was for my freedom, but maybe it was just fear. I never said that to you." He studied her quietly, moonlight reflecting in his gray eyes. "You don't owe me an apology for wanting your own life," he said, though his tone was laced with lingering hurt. "You were 18. We were both young." "But I hurt you," she insisted, tears threatening to spill again. "I see now that rejecting the mate bond, it cut deep, for both of us. If I'd stayed," he stepped closer, gently placing a finger to her lips to hush her. "We can't redo the past," he said. "Perhaps you needed that time to realize what matters to you. And Redwood Falls needed you to come back of your own free will." Her chest tightened as she let her tears flow. "I don't expect you to forget or to accept me as your mate again, but if there's any way we can move forward, maybe not as strangers or enemies, I'd like that. Our worlds are tied together now more than ever. I don't want to lose you all over again." For a moment, he appeared torn, emotions warring in his expression. Then he lifted his bandaged arm, wincing slightly at the pain, but placed his uninjured hand on her cheek, brushing away a tear with his thumb. The sensation was achingly familiar, a gentle warmth she had dreamed of more than once during her college years. "Calla," he said quietly, "we've forged an alliance that saved Redwood Falls and united it with Bloodfang. Your parents survived. Redwood Falls is safe, for now. We still have enemies out there, but at least we have a fighting chance. As for us, oh..." He paused, exhaling. "I can't pretend I'm not still angry about what happened. But I also can't deny that seeing you again, feeling that bond, even if it was injured, it stirred something I thought I'd buried." Hope fluttered in her chest, tentative but bright. She covered his hand with hers, inhaling the scent of pine and warm fur that clung to him. It takes time, I understand. We can figure it out together. I'll be here. He gave a faint smile, leaning in so their foreheads touched. Then, let's take it one day at a time, he murmured. The threat isn't gone, but Redwood Falls and Bloodfang will stand as allies, and maybe you and I will find a way to mend what was broken. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. In the quiet Redwood Falls night, under the glow of the street lamp, they stood in a gentle embrace. The old wounds remained, but the first hints of healing flickered. Fate had pulled them together through crisis. Perhaps, despite her initial rejection, something of the mate bond endured, refusing to be silenced. Behind them, Redwood Falls was already beginning to celebrate the return of its beta. Bloodfang wolves mingled with local townspeople, forging the beginnings of a new era of cooperation. The captured rogues would be interrogated, leading to further raids and efforts to uproot the larger threat. And in time, Redwood Falls would regain its sense of stability, secure in the knowledge that an alpha who once was only a distant figure now stood with them. As Calla closed her eyes, leaning into Riker's warmth, she thought of her parents recovering in the clinic, of Redwood Falls' newfound alliance, and of the possibility of rewriting a destiny she once tried to escape. She realized that rejecting him had broken them both, but in the chaos of these events, they found a chance at redemption. Slowly, carefully, she would walk beside him, no longer running from a bond that might just be stronger than her fears. Tomorrow, they would keep fighting the threats lurking beyond the borders. Tomorrow, they would piece together the mysteries behind Cassian and his faction. But for tonight, she allowed herself this moment, wrapped in the Alpha's arms under a moonlit sky, knowing that in the face of every danger, they had chosen to stand side by side. And for Calla Monroe, that was enough to believe that fate, whether cruel or kind, had granted them a new beginning.